Good evening. I now call the February 22nd meeting of the Wallingford-Swarthmore School Board to order. In opening, as you're willing and able, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I would like to start by asking Ms. Fagora to take the roll call.
Mr. Ballas,
Here.
Ms. Semino. Dr. Downey,
Here.
Dr. Huff,
Here.
Mr. Cutis,
Here.
Mrs. Lentz,
Here.
Mr. Sullivan,
Here.
Mrs. Walkman,
Here.
Dr. Grandy,
Here.
Mr. Berman,
Here.
Dr. Palmer,
Here.
Ms. Patel,
Here.
Dr. Grandy, you have 9 voting members present.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Fagora. So this evening, we will start as usual with the student representatives report. Ms. Patel.
Thank you, Dr. Grandy. This month, all of the schools in our district have been busy learning about Black history and finding ways to integrate social justice-minded thinking into all aspects of school and life. First, at SRS, 4th grade students have spent numerous hours planning, researching, and drafting their African American Living Wax Museum slideshows. Despite the challenges of a virtual environment, students have found this process to be extremely rewarding and are very excited to share their work. Family and friends are invited to view the students' presentations through Zoom. For the Black Lives Matter School Day of celebration at SRS, Janine Osayund, the founder and director of Dunya Performing Arts Company, will present My Historically Black Neighborhood of Swarthmore oral history. SRS is excited for the special assembly happening this Friday, February 26th. At West next week, PBIS expectations for our learning community will be relaunched. This year, in conjunction with our Teaching Tolerance, social justice standard work. This PBIS team has created lessons around CURE. Each letter represents a theme we will be working on: connection, understanding, respect, and empathy. Our lesson next week will focus on listening as a way to build connection using the book Night of the Moon by Hina Khan. We are also so grateful for our West PTO and the guest author committee for securing Ms. Khan as a virtual guest author on March 3rd. We are excited to have her join us and practice our listening for connection skills. In both the Online Academy and WES, many wonderful activities and lessons around influential African American figures have been and will continue to happen. Teachers have also been crafting and sharing lessons in support of the district's recognition of Black Lives Matter in schools on February 26th. Some of the many activities being done include listening to the story Enough by Grace Byers and Learning Through Science, Concepts of Skin Colors with the text All the Colors We Are by Kate Kissinger. Principal Savage shares that the mission of this diversity work is to make what we do meaningful and lasting for students and staff. Students at NPE have also been active in their learning about the contributions of African Americans throughout Black History Month. In addition, grade levels have been busily preparing for the upcoming day of understanding and affirmation. Here is just a brief overview. Kindergarten students at NPE will listen to the story, Sometimes We March by Tessa Allen, and will learn how to speak up with courage and respect when they or someone else has been hurt or wronged by bias. Second grade students will deepen their understanding of social justice and equality with relation to the Pledge of Allegiance and Black Lives Matter at school, and creating a culminating activity in a mural formation where each student will create their own depiction of justice and equality. The mural will be displayed in the main lobby area. The 3rd grade team at NPE has been incorporating Black history throughout various parts of their curriculum. Students are learning about famous African American women this week during their morning meeting. And 4th grade students will be reading Something Happened in Our Town and doing other activities to learn more about how to get to know others because of who they are and not how they look. Similarly, students at Strathaven High School have been working this month to make the school a more compassionate and inclusive space. Last week, the Student Council and National Honor Society hosted and promoted a kindness campaign. Students were encouraged to complete a random act of kindness every day of the week, such as compliment a friend, make dinner for their family, or pay for a stranger's food. The Student Council contributed to the kindness campaign by distributing Valentine's Day goodie bags to all of the high school's faculty to thank them for their hard work and support this year. Also, something to look forward to for Haven students and families, Coffee House is returning on March 17th at 10 a.m. Students should check their email for the Zoom link, and all students with music or poetry to share are encouraged to reach out to Mr. Fisher with their work to perform. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patel. Next up, we have the superintendent's report. Dr. Palmer.
Thank you, Dr. Grandy. And I'd like to build on what Mira just reported. As you know, the Wallingford-Swarthmore School District has declared Friday, February 26th as Black Lives Matter at School, a day of understanding and affirmation, which will culminate our Black History Month activities. Our educators and administration across the district have worked together to create a day of learning opportunities to better educate ourselves and seek to educate our school community on historical and the current impact of racism and discrimination on our students, families, and communities, as well as understand our role in perpetuating such inequity. This Day of Understanding and Affirmation is created to affirm the lives of Black children and to promote understanding that will strengthen our community. Racial equity will not happen unless people are willing to talk about race, and this day is one important step in that process. And I am hopeful that is what is one day this year will be even more days in the future. In addition to the school board adopting the Black Lives Matters at School, a Day of Understanding and Affirmation resolution at the January 25th board meeting, I am thrilled to report that the Wallingford-Swarthmore Education Association, also known as WSEA, has adopted a similar resolution, which I'd like to read now. And it's entitled the WSEA Black Lives Matter Resolution. Whereas the WSEA promotes equity and supports social justice work in our schools. And whereas we act in solidarity with our members and our community to affirm that Black lives matter and to ensure that every Black student and educator can live, grow, and thrive with support, love, and joy. And whereas the goal of Black Lives Matter at School is to inspire an ongoing movement of critical reflection and honest conversation and impactful actions in our school communities for people of all ages to engage with issues of racial and social justice. Therefore, let it be resolved that WSEA supports equity and social justice training within our organization by working with social justice community groups and supporting the hiring of an equity officer or teacher on assignment for the 21-22 school year. And therefore, let it be resolved that WSEA celebrates Black lives, participates in Black Lives Matter at School this year, and moving forward endorses an anti-racist curriculum. And therefore, let it be resolved that WSEA supports hiring and retaining teachers of color and anti-racist teachers. Thank you to WSEA President Dave Waldman for sharing this. Thank you to the WSEA Rep Council members for approving it. Thank you to my colleagues Liz, Bridget, Sue, Jennifer, Emily, Jen, and Rita for collaborating and drafting it. WSEA and WSSD are united and are locking arms in our attempt to make our school community more welcoming and socially just. We have two focus topics on the agenda this evening, and one is quite significant. And that topic is the elementary transition, part 2. During the focus topic at our last board meeting, we presented Elementary Transition Part 1, which included a possible timeline and a list of tasks that would be associated with transitioning our elementary students back to full in-person instruction. We also presented an overview of our health and safety assurances. Tonight, in Part 2, we are going to build on that presentation as we now have more information. Since our meeting, we surveyed our elementary parents regarding their opinions and their choice of learning modality for their child or their children. Nora Wheeler, our Director of Instructional Technology, will present the survey results. She'll be joined by our principals as well. After our last meeting, we also learned more from the CDC, the Chester County Health Department, and CHOP. So I'd like to speak a little about this now, and then a bit more during the focus topic presentation. So first, on February 12th, the CDC came out with their, quote, operational strategy for K-12 schools through phased mitigation. In the document, they stressed that the essential elements of a safe K-12 school in-person instruction include these items. They include consistent implementation of layered mitigation strategies. They have indicators of community transition. They include phased mitigation and learning modes, meaning more strategies for a situation as they get better or worse and changing in learning modes. They also include that there's additional prevention that can be gained through testing. And then they also point out that there's additional prevention that comes in the form of vaccination for teachers and staffs and in the communities as soon as the supply allows. Very important in the report, the CDC says 5 key mitigation strategies that are essential for in-person instruction and help mitigation of COVID-19 transmission in our schools include the following: masking, which I am having difficulty with my mask as I talk. I think it wants me not to talk quite so much. So masking, physical distancing, good hygiene, cleaning, and contact tracing. And of those 5, the 2 mitigation strategies that they say should be prioritized are masking, meaning using the right mask and correctly using it, and physical distancing. And they point out in the CDC report, they are talking at least 6 feet should be maximized to the greatest extent possible. I'm saying this now because I'm going to start with the discussion of the CDC report, move on to CHOP, and then move into the Chester County Health Department. So the CDC has created a table of indicators and thresholds for community transmission, and they include 4 categories in that table. They have low, moderate, substantial, and high. They include a 7-day incident rate per 100,000 and a 7-day percent positivity. We've seen this before in the Chester County Health model. The categories are a little bit different, but the same information is there. And when you look at the grid, they don't relax the 6-foot physical distancing until the community level reaches moderate, which of the 4 of the highest, it is the second lowest. So when I read their guidance, I know the CDC is giving guidance for the entire nation. They're not just giving us guidance for the Philadelphia area or putting no additional emphasis on Philadelphia. And there's certainly no additional emphasis knowing the information on how we are performing in the Wallingford-Swarthmore community. But I provide everyone the CDC guidance as a baseline. And then I think it's easier to stop and think, what does the CDC say? And then let me layer on what we've learned through CHOP and then what we've learned through the Chester County Health Department. So moving on to CHOP, Dr. Rubin was with us at the last board meeting, and he talked about his thoughts on our elementary students returning to full in-person learning. And as a follow-up to his visit with us, I'd like to highlight CHOP's February 17th blog entitled COVID-19 Outlook, Spring Planning for In-Person Schooling Can Continue. If you went onto our website, we have a link on board docs to this document, and we also have a link to the next document that I'm going to talk about, but it is included on the agenda. The CHOP blog highlights that overall, the CDC guidance, quote, reflects the evolution of a year's worth of highly debated recommendations, distilling those that have stood the test of time and abandoning those that have failed to add value. End quote. The CHOPS team's view is that the thresholds, although they are conservative, should serve as approximate guides for schools developing and refining their reopening plans. They should serve as guardrails for schools officials, but they shouldn't be interpreted as absolute requirements. We know that the CHOP team themselves had moved away from recommending rigid thresholds to the school districts last fall when they saw how successful schools have been with their multi-layered school safety plans. And one of the most important quotes that I saw in the CHOP blog was, quote, ultimately, As they advance their in-person schooling plans, each school will need to consider its own community's unique context and experience with its protocols to date. So I am going to take a moment here and stress that we have been using a multi-layered approach from the very beginning, and it has been successful for us. So to remind everyone, our masking compliance has been excellent. Our physical distancing has been maintained. Good hygiene has become a way of life. Disinfecting protocols have been consistently followed. Contact tracing is well oiled, and I do send a special shout out to our nurses who do an amazing job with contact tracing. And I'll add one, people who are sick do not come to school. That's still a very critical component for us. So I've talked about the CDC and their guidance for the nation. I've highlighted select portions of the CHOP blog that I think are particularly important for us, and the CHOP blog focuses locally. Now I want to share information from the Chester County Health Department, our local health department for COVID, and the information that was received by me last Friday evening. So I've mentioned numerous times in my superintendent's report that Jean Kasner, now Jean Franklin, is the public health director for the Chester County Health Department, and she meets with county superintendents at least once and sometimes twice a week, and even a few times, 3 times a week. She works very closely with all of us, and she knows what mitigation strategies each of the school districts employ. Further, she monitors our incident rate and our percent positivity. She knows how school districts are doing and how our communities are doing. Her letter, which I mentioned was on board docs, includes a particularly significant statement. And this one is, quote, "Because of the layered mitigation measures you have successfully implemented, we support schools increasing more in-person learning through reduced physical distancing. Specifically, when certain community transmission levels are met and layered mitigation strategies are continued, schools are encouraged to reduce physical distancing as outlined below." She also notes that this change is further supported and closely aligns with the CDC's recently released operational strategy for K-12 schools through phased mitigation. The Chester County Health Department does include a table of indicators. It has 4 categories. The titles of the categories are slightly different, but the content in the 4 categories is exactly the same. But what's different from the CDC's table are the guidelines that pertain to physical distancing. And I will share that information during the focus topic presentation. But otherwise, the tables are exactly the same. So we are still battling a very serious disease, and we have done an excellent job in keeping our students and staff safe during the pandemic. Gina Ross, our Director of Student Services, and Ferg Abbott, our Director of Human Resources and Operations, will add more depth to what I just overviewed. So moving from elementary education to middle and high school, we've already been receiving questions about when will the middle school and the high school students be returning to full in-person instruction. And the short answer is that is already in the planning phase. It's underway, however, it's still in the preliminary stage. The administration is working on a parent and guardian survey, and you can anticipate hearing from them in the few days ahead, most likely early next week. And then, before I close, I'd like to say thank you to some folks. Today is National School Bus Driver Day, in case you didn't know. So thank you to our wonderful drivers who safely navigated a very difficult driving day today and others over the last few weeks. As difficult as the weather has been, our drivers, bus monitors, and transportation department staff are true professionals who safely navigate our roadways and are there with reliable service and a friendly smile for our children. Thank you. Thank you. And today has been what I would call a yucky snow day, a very technical term there. Thank you to our amazing operations department for going above and beyond once again. We have had a number of snow days, virtual days, and even a 2-hour delay. When that occurs, many of us will spend the day safe, sound, warm, and dry within our homes. For our operations department, that is so not the case. They are our first responders. Thank you to our operations department, to our maintenance staff, our grounds crew, custodians, supervisor, and director. Thank you for your dedication to our students and our staff. You are the best. And Dr. Grandy, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. And actually, I was just saying before the meeting, one of my favorite days over the past year during the pandemic was when we all got to ride the school buses during the senior graduation parade. So thank you to all of our bus drivers. I do have one board announcement before we move on to our focus topics this evening. The full board has been very engaged, as I've mentioned, with the search process for Wallingford-Swarthmore's next superintendent. And after 3 sessions of first round interviews, we've narrowed the candidate pool to a handful of educational leaders who will meet with the board for second round interviews over the course of the next 10 days. And the board is on track with its process and its timeline and is very hopeful of an appointment by April 1st. So that takes us to our focus topics that Dr. Palmer was just referring to. But before we invite our speakers up, I do just want to make a couple opening remarks before we get into our elementary discussion. As Dr. Palmer mentioned, we are certainly picking that conversation up this evening. Since that last meeting, as all of you know, we've surveyed our elementary families to gather opinions and perspectives, and also to learn about enrollment decisions if we transition to this model. And we will hear about those results this evening, along with other updates from our discussion 2 weeks ago. But before we resume that discussion, I do have a few points I would like to make. And these are some things I said at the last meeting, but I do want to echo again. And I think it's important for all of us to realize that every single person in our community, and we certainly have heard it in many ways, will have a different way of looking at this decision. Everyone will have a different set of concerns and priorities for their own family, and everyone will face somewhat different life circumstances. But I do hope that we can all agree on one thing, that all of those concerns, every single person's concerns, are valid. I hope we don't look at this issue as having sides. I hope we don't look at this issue of right or wrong. We really are not on different teams here, and we're all trying to do, I think, what is best for our students. And we certainly should not be personally attacking one another about our views. We can have a healthy, constructive debate. We can find ways to understand one another, and we can certainly find ways to compromise. Our students, they're living through an unprecedented disruption to their own lives. We all are, and some are certainly facing more adversity than others, and some are certainly facing more risk than others. But our students are all watching us. They're watching us to see how we respond to these challenges. They may not say it, but they are watching, and it is up to us to show our students how our community can work through challenges and emerge from it stronger as opposed to divided. So my plea, not just for today, but going forward, is that we can all respect one another and each other's views, have constructive debates, never attack one another, and we can and should debate the ideas. And I hope we won't attack our teachers, our neighbors, our parents, and certainly not our students. And I do want to say I have deep respect for our teachers. My own children have been shaped by fantastic WSSD teachers throughout their entire education. They've been supported all along the way by their teachers, and we put a great deal of trust as parents in our teachers, and that trust is well deserved. And they've been so important in my own children's lives, and I heard from so many parents who say the same thing. Some of you may know, I work in healthcare, and early in the pandemic, healthcare providers went to work every day with communities cheering them on. You probably saw videos in New York City, people hanging out windows, banging pots and pans. In Philadelphia, there was a military flyover, there was food deliveries all the time. And that did a lot to really pick people up during a very difficult time. And we haven't had the same cheering for our teachers. And I just hope that whatever we do, we can understand how hard it is to teach during a pandemic. It's been hard to practice healthcare during a pandemic, and it is very hard to teach during a pandemic. And we find ways to cheer our teachers on through this. When the pandemic passes, and it will eventually, we will still be part of this same community altogether. Our students will still look to their teachers for guidance, support, and instruction. And we all will need to work together to heal the divisions in our own community and help those that have been most harmed by the pandemic. So I just say that as a preface to the conversation this evening that we're going to resume. I do want to say just a few words about the structure of the evening. So we'll start, as Dr. Palmer just alluded to, with our focus topic discussion. That's a time for the administration to present back to the board with updates from the discussion, including the survey results. Then we'll have time for public comments for items that are on the agenda this evening, which does include the health and safety plan modifications that are necessary for the elementary plan to go forward. Then we will move on to the agenda and voting on items. And then later in the meeting, we'll have time for public comment for items not on the agenda. I do want to mention that as indicated on the agenda, we're reserving up to 1 hour and 15 minutes for the first set of public comments and up to 30 minutes for the second set in the interest of an orderly and efficient meeting. We will limit each comment to 3 minutes to give as many people as possible the chance to be heard. And when we get to that point, we'll alternate back and forth between called in and in-person comments and try to keep that process moving as quickly as we can. I do want to mention, I think we'll update this just on the website. I think there has been some confusion about calling in comments. In general, called in comments are something that we can accept after the agenda is posted for the meeting. So there were some comments that came in before that happened, which we will read this evening to the extent we have time. But just going forward, we'll make sure that is clear. So anyway, that's just a little bit on kind of the flow of things this evening. And so let me hand things back over to Dr. Palmer to introduce our speakers for our first focus topic.
We have a lot of speakers for this particular topic. As I had mentioned before, we are going to be talking about our elementary transition part 2. We are going to start with Dr. Wheeler. She will introduce it and will lead the first part where we will be looking at our survey results. We will then look at a transition timeline and tasks, and Dr. Citarelli-Jones will be back. Oh, and I also realize the principals will be with Dr. Wheeler as well, and I apologize, I did not include them as they are all walking through the door now. And then we will pick up on a recap of our health and safety assurances, where we'll have Gina Ross and Ferg Abbott joining me for that portion. This is comprehensive. We ask you to have patience with us, but we wanted to make sure we put information out into the community and gave the board a very thorough recap of where we are and what did we learn by the survey. So Dr. Wheeler, when you are ready, take it away.
All right, good evening. As Dr. Palmer said, my name is Nora Wheeler, Director of Instructional Technology, and I'm going to begin our team presentation tonight by providing an overview of the results of the WSSD Elementary Parent Survey on possible revisions to the education plan. On the 9th, as promised, we disseminated the survey to about 1,645 recipients, did provide a few updates over the course of that week before it closed. In total, we had 1,452 responses. However, we quickly realized we needed to clean up the data before doing any analysis. In addition to over 100 incomplete responses, likely because people wanted to read the survey before answering everything. Dr. Palmer and our building principals combed through the responses to identify duplicates, discrepancies, because we didn't want to double count students or any other data associated with the family response. This did take a significant amount of time, but we do feel like we were able to clean up to get just a response per family. After removing the duplicates, we were left with 1,097 total responses. Each response represents a family and all of their elementary students. Throughout the reporting of results, I'll do my best to clearly identify whether I'm referring to the family response or whether I'm referring to individual students. And as you can see, the responses by neighborhood school, we had 333 NPE families, which represented about 440 students. 391 from SRS in terms of family responses for 523 students, and then 376 West families for 519 students. The principals did do some further work, so when they report out some numbers later, they might be slightly different than mine as they clarified responses from a few families. And just to give you an idea in terms of distribution of those students across the grade levels, it was pretty comparable to what our actual student enrollment is. We didn't see particularly high or low in any one grade level. In terms of current modality of the responses, 30% of responses were for families with one or more student in the online academy, and the other 70% were for families with one or more student currently in our cohort model for in-person learning. In the first section of the survey, after the introduction, respondents were asked to indicate how important 4 different considerations are and how they feel about sending their elementary age child or children to school in person 4.5 days a week with reduced distance requirements. I'm going to take you through each of the 4 considerations, first examining the overall data, and then looking at a side-by-side comparison of how current in-person learning families responded and how online academy parents responded. The first consideration asked respondents to identify the level of importance placed upon getting their child or children back to full-time in-person school as quickly as possible for more in-person instruction. The range was about 20%. At the low end of the range, slightly important was selected by 13% of families, and extremely important was the highest at 33% of all families. In total, this consideration was very or extremely important to 53% of all respondents. When we separate out that data for the first consideration between in-person and online academy families, the distribution across the levels of importance shows a far more variation. In fact, the overall distribution from not at all on the left to extremely important on the right for each graph is the complete inverse. Whereas 68% of in-person learning families think more in-person instruction is very or extremely important consideration, 64% of online academy families think it is not at all or slightly important. Next, families were asked to consider how important getting their child back to full-time in-person school as quickly as possible for social and emotional reasons is to how they feel about sending their child or children to school in person 4.5 days a week with reduced distance requirements this school year. As compared to the first consideration, there is an increase of 4% in extremely important and a decrease in those who felt it was not important at all. Overall, 56% of respondents feel this is a very or extremely important consideration. When we break this question down by current modality, the in-person families considered social and emotional reasons almost identically to the level of importance of in-person learning. There was a 4% drop from very important and a 4% increase in extremely important. For the online academy families, however, the graph does look a bit different than in the first consideration. Getting a child back for social and emotional reasons resulted in a different distribution across the levels of importance. Here, the range from extremely important to not at all was only 20%, whereas the range was 34% for getting them back for in-person instruction of the first consideration. The next consideration asked families to indicate how important waiting for community COVID rates to decline substantially is to how they feel about sending their child, their elementary child or children to school in person 4.5 days a week with reduced distance requirements. For 50% of respondents, this consideration was very or extremely important to their feelings about the proposed plan. 30% felt it is not or a slightly important consideration. It is not at all or slightly important consideration. As you can see in this side-by-side comparison, 85% of the online academy families that responded indicated that this consideration was very or extremely important to them. For in-person learning families, the distribution across the spectrum hovered close to 20% in each of the 5 levels of importance. The final consideration in this first section of the survey asked families to indicate how important waiting for more widespread vaccine availability is to how they feel about sending their elementary child or children to school in person 4.5 days a week with reduced distance requirements. This graph is almost the same as the previous one for all respondents. There was a slight drop from 50 to 48% in terms of it being very or extremely important consideration. The same is true in this side-by-side comparison. The importance of the vaccine as a consideration of how they feel about the plan is similar to waiting for a decline in the community COVID-19 rates for both groups. The next section of the survey focused on opinions of the proposed plan. It is important to note that throughout the rest of the survey analysis, opposed means they are not happy with the proposed plan, or they do not like one or more of the suggested consideration or conditions, such as distancing the start date or a half-day Wednesday. It does not necessarily mean that they are not a proponent of going back in person based on other responses and comments in the survey itself. When asked whether they favor or oppose this plan to reduce the classroom distance requirement from 6 feet to 3 feet and bring all students, excluding those who wish to remain in the online academy, back to 4.5 days per week as early as mid-March, 40% strongly oppose or oppose, and 47% strongly favor or favor across all respondents. When we separate out current in-person families and online academy families with this question, 62% of in-person families and 9% of online academy families favor or strongly favor the plan to start mid-March, whereas 26% of in-person families and 74% of online academy families oppose or strongly oppose the plan to start in mid-March. Families were also asked whether they favor or oppose the proposed plan with an April or post-spring break start date. The later date did result in additional families being in favor or strongly in favor of the proposed plan. For in-person families, the increase was 7%, and for online academy families, the increase was 8% over the mid-March start. In this section, families identified the child or children they have in elementary school, the modality where each child is currently placed, and whether their commitment was to remain the same or if they would switch modality. Of the families that responded to the survey, 1,021 total families, or 93%, elected to remain in their current placement. A closer examination of this information revealed that 501 of these families favor the plan, 391 families oppose the plan, and of these 391 families, 229 are online academy families who have elected to remain in online academy, and 162 are in-person learning families who have elected to remain in person. As you can see here, there are some families who have elected to change modalities if the proposed plan is passed. 38 families, which amounts to 53 students, move from the online academy to in-person learning. 34 families, which amounts to 44 students, go from in-person learning to online academy. Later in the presentation, the principals will report slightly different numbers based on work they did at the building level to ensure accuracy of some selections due to discrepancy in the initial survey data. We took a deeper look, on this slide, we take a deeper look at the 72 families who decided to change their child's placement. The 72 families represent 6.5% of total families. 15 of the families favor the proposed plan and are current online academy families. 13 of the 15 neutral responses are from the online academy, and 2 of the neutral responses are from in-person learning families. The data shows that a majority, or 42, of these 72 families actually oppose the plan. 10 are currently in the online academy, and 32 are in-person learning families who are electing to switch to online academy. If we consider that this switch creates a disruption to the child's learning and results in a new teacher, one might interpret that to mean they are not necessarily moving to something they favor, but might be driven away by one or more of the considerations in the plan. While that provided some additional information on those who are changing placement, we also looked further into the families who opted to commit to in-person learning. The survey results indicated that 773 families committed to in-person learning if the plan moves forward. As we know from the earlier slide, 38 of these families are currently enrolled in online academy and would be switching to the in-person learning. The remaining 735 families are currently in the cohort model. While the majority are in favor of the plan, approximately 22% of these 735 families indicated that they opposed the plan. When we look further into how the 22% responded to the different considerations in question 1, it appears the group values a decline in COVID rates and widespread availability of the vaccine somewhere between very important and extremely important. This group also values in-person instruction and the need to return for social and emotional reasons somewhere between slightly important and moderately important. This is further supported by their shift in attitudes, as all but 2 families' favorability rating of the plan improves or remains the same if the full person model moves to after spring break. In other words, their attitude improved or remained the same from their initial response with the mid-March start. It does not necessarily mean that they agree with the plan. We were asked to look further into the 172 families that opposed the plan but committed to in-person learning. To do this examination, we looked deeper at the comments made by the 132 of the 172 opposed to the plan and coded their written responses. The reason it's not 172 is because 40 families did not make any comment. In some cases, more than one specific objection was made within the comment itself, so each objection was counted. Safety concerns, which are represented here in the darker blue, are separated into 3 categories because specific objections were different. Distancing, specifically moving away from 6 feet, was coded 53 times. The vaccine and waiting for either all teachers or more people to be vaccinated was coded 42 times. And comments about COVID rates were coded 17 times. The next highest objection, with 31 mentions, related to staying hybrid or being able to stay in the current cohort model. They use those words interchangeably. The plan being disrupted this late in the school year was coded 17 times, followed by delaying the proposed start of the plan at 16 times. There were also 5 comments, but had no specific objection. 3 objected to the possibility of a teacher change, and 2 objected to a half day on Wednesday rather than a full day. We then examined that 773 families that committed to in-person learning to see how delaying the start of the proposed plan until after spring break impacted the favor-opposed response. And we saw the following. 199 families' attitudes about the proposed plan improved along the favorability continuum. For example, they may have gone from strongly opposed to opposed, opposed to favor, favor to strongly favor, etc. With comments such as the vaccine being more widely distributed, rates to drop, and would be more comfortable with a change in the distancing. 74 families saw it as a detriment. There were numerous written comments that shed some light onto why it decreased. For example, comments such as "don't delay and start right now." 500 families' attitude remained unchanged regardless of the start time. The final portion of the survey provided families an opportunity to comment. There was a comment section after the considerations and an opinion section, as well as one after the placement commitment section in the survey. Over 650 respondents or families provided one or more comment, although this includes short statements such as "thank you." We first worked through coding comments in these three broad categories: in support, neutral, and opposed to the plan. We looked for keywords and phrases in order to identify general themes within each of the categories. Neutral, for example, included some bus concerns, issues with the half day, where a family offered an idea from another district or asked a question. Supportive comments tended to be shorter and included phrases such as "let's start today," "thank you for getting our kids back," and "my child needs to be in school learning." The comments coded as opposed varied from very direct statements such as "I oppose the plan" to explaining the part of the plan or parts of the plan that they did not like, such as COVID-raised distancing or waiting for the vaccine. Others in opposition commented on it simply being too disruptive, feeling pressured to commit, and wanting to stay hybrid as it is now. The idea of potentially having to change a teacher was mentioned throughout the comments in all three categories, with families indicating that they would likely change their commitment if their particular teacher had to move. I hope this survey overview provides you with a good understanding of some of the data collected. The next part of our presentation is for our principals to give an overview on how placement commitments impact students at the building level. And so for this, I'll turn it over to Al to start with MPE.
Thank you, Dr. Wheeler. Thank you all for having us tonight. I'm just going to take a quick moment and just thank Nora and her team for all the work that they put in to turn around these numbers in a very fast fashion, 24 to 48 hours. Also, to the staff at our respective buildings who made phone calls to try to finalize the data. A lot of work went in, so I just want to take a minute and thank all of the people who put a lot of hard work in to get this as accurate as possible. Each of us are going to go through by school, talk about the student changes, how many students are changing modalities. We're going to look at the class sizes, talk about potential teacher change, if any, and any potential building change due to current cap sizes at grade levels across the district. Beginning with NPE, as you can see, the overall number of students that we would have in person is not that dissimilar to cohorts A and B combined. We would have 13 students currently would transition from cohort to OA, and 14 students transfer from online academy to in-person. So obviously that would be 27 students who would have a transition and a new teacher. In terms of students in the building, it would be very similar to the enrollment that we have currently. Looking at the grade levels, the changes are actually fairly even, ranging from 1 to 3 students at most grade levels, with the exception of grade 3, that has about 4 to 6, but again, 6 going out, 4 coming back. So really a net change of only 1 or 2 students in terms of children in the building. So the class sizes overall would range from 14 to 23 is where we are today. Interestingly enough, the 14 and the 23 are actually both in our kindergarten. At NPE, we have 3 sections. We have 1 in-person section and 1 AM in-person section and 2 in-person sections. We do have a 4th section, but that is an OA teacher who teaches in person in the afternoon. The AM section is currently at 23, which is the cap size for kindergarten in our district. Should the board decide to bring students back, we would explore opportunities for students, families enrolled in that AM class to potentially move to the PM class. So we're looking at those options. That would not necessitate a teacher change. It would be the same teacher. So that's how we're looking at that. That would raise that 14 up probably to 17 or 18, which would put all of our class sizes probably in the range of 17 to probably at most 22 at this point, moving forward, should the board decide to bring the cohorts together. So in summary, for NPE, as a result, there'd be no teacher changes that we foresee. And once again, class sizes are probably going to range between, say, 16 to 22, again, depending on what happens with that kindergarten. So if there's no questions for NP, I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Tuck.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heinley. Thank you very much. Good evening to the school board, and thank you very much for your time and your talent and your patience regarding making this decision. We appreciate all of the effort that you have put into this process. Thank you, Nora. Dr. Wheeler, also, thank you for the wonderful presentation, the slides, and all the information. At this point at SRS, we're looking at 15 children leaving cohort and going to OA. And we have 14 children leaving OA coming into cohort. So it's only a difference of 1. We're just about balanced at each grade level with the exception of kindergarten. We have 6 children coming into kindergarten versus the 1 leaving. And we have 6 children leaving cohort versus the 1 in 3rd grade. So basically it does balance out equal, meaning the amount of children that are leaving us are similar to the amount of children that will be returning to the OA process. We are looking at keeping all of our teachers the same. We will not have any changes due to the fact that we have an even amount. We have 15 leaving and 14 coming in. So that means that all of the SRS teachers will remain SRS cohort teachers. And we're really happy about that because we know the connection that our students have made with their teachers. And we are looking at all of our grade levels, having seats available, just in case another building needs to transfer a student over. So we do have space in kindergarten as well as through 5th grades. So therefore, we're able to accommodate all of our students returning from OA to cohort, as well as to accommodate any other child that may need to transfer from their home building to our building. At this point, our class sizes will be basically from 13 to 24, which will be within the guidelines that we have. And there, as I said earlier, there are no changes to teaching, to the assignments, the placement of the students. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Gabe Savage.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to echo the sentiments of Mr. Heinley and Dr. Tuck. It's been amazing to watch our administrative team grow over this last calendar year and just figure out how to make things work. So I'm very thankful to be a part of this team. For Wallingford Elementary School, we have some slightly different numbers. We have 21 students returning back to us, and we have 8 students going out. That's a plus 13 in the building for us. Our class size also ranges from 14 to 26, much like MPE. That 14 is in kindergarten. And just as a note, in kindergarten is actually our largest group of students coming back from the online academy. We're +7 in kindergarten that's coming in, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. As far as teacher changes, if a student did not change modality, then they're keeping their teacher. The only people who are getting a new teacher are people who are changing from OA to cohort or cohort to OA. I do want to highlight this piece at the bottom, building change. As I said in kindergarten, we have 7 kindergarteners coming back to the building. Our PM kindergarten only has maybe 1 slot left. And I think there are 5 of the kids coming back are currently in PM kindergarten. So we obviously can't fit them all in the class. However, if they were open to moving to AM, where that class size is much smaller, we could work that out. If not, Mr. Heinley and Dr. Tuck have shared that they do have room inside their buildings for those students. I also want to highlight 1st grade. Our 1st grade at West was already maxed out. So before all the movement even occurred, we were already at our class size limit. So it is very likely that the students who are returning would have to go to MPE or SRS in order to have in-person instruction. Now I want to highlight a little bit the online academy. So our numbers were a little bit different than Dr. Willer's. We found that about 49 students total were leaving the online academy to go back to the buildings. And we found that 30, I think your number was 44. So our number was 36. So we found that 36 students were leaving the building to go to the online academy. So that was a plus 13 to the buildings. Okay. Overall, in the online academy, we're very solid as far as class size and being able to accommodate everybody who is coming in. And the class size ranges are similar, 14 to 26. It will shift a little bit once or if we move students back into the online academy, the class size will shift up a little bit. So that's the overview for elementary. And good luck on making your decision because I don't envy you. Dr. Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Savage. So I am just really here to remind everybody about where our timeline is. This is really just a repeat from last presentation. So when we take a look at where we are tonight, starting tomorrow and running through March 12th, the following things will be taking place. We will have health and safety measures refined. That includes our classrooms, our large spaces, hallways, buses, and the like. Schedule analysis for curriculum alignment. It is very important at the elementary school that our online academy students and our students who would be full in person are having the same learning experience. By that, I mean that they have opportunities to meet the learning outcomes. I spoke about learning outcomes last time I was here, and that's what I am referring to here. That requires a significant number of meetings. We meet with our grade level chairs. We meet in the buildings, building based. So our kindergarten will meet across the district, for example. They'll meet each kindergarten within their buildings. These curriculum alignment meetings are really essential to making sure that our OA students and our full in-person students would be at the same learning outcomes by the end of the school year. We're also looking at procedures for lunch, recess, dismissal, arrival. We have many parents who question how these procedures are going to look, and we understand that's foremost on their mind. We want to get that right. Also, we're talking about the education and health and safety meetings. So our elementary education committee meets every Wednesday now. We used to just meet twice a month. Now it's every week we're meeting. And in those, we are talking about the specific health and safety needs. Teachers will bring things up. They are the ones who are operationalizing things in the classrooms. Things occur to them, issues, concerns that don't occur to us when we are not in the classroom. And so that's essential work that we do. Also, there's a communication piece, communicating to parents about the new teacher for those who would receive a new teacher, communication about transportation, communication back from the parent, and questions that we have. We need to leave enough time for that to breathe, for parents to feel that the questions they can ask and get answered in enough time. And then finally, teaching and learning preparation. We're talking about a change in modality. We're talking about more kids being back in the classroom. It changes the way a teacher teaches. It changes what's possible. It changes the number of students in front of you. And for students who would be Zooming in because of quarantine or a sickness past 3 days, you also have those students attending that way. And so how do you make sure that they're not left behind when you have more kids directly in front of you? So that's going to take some PD. That's going to take some brainstorming. That's going to take some collaboration, and we need that time. So once we get past the March 12th area, we're looking at how do we exactly transition on this. And so what we're looking at here is really a timeline that provides the necessary allocation of time to get all of it done and done well. So when we look at hiring, I mentioned hiring the last time. Hiring isn't just for the core teachers. It isn't just would we need a new third grade teacher. It isn't just would we need a new kindergarten teacher, for example. There's hiring that could be done with transportation. There could be hiring needs for related services. There could be hiring needs that need to be done for specialists, for example. Until we actually get those numbers settled out, we cannot be sure there is no hiring. So we have to leave space for that as well. In addition, we're looking at the transition days for building preparation. I mentioned it last time, I'll mention it again. Having students at home and not in the building makes it possible for us to rearrange the furniture, to pull out bookshelves where necessary, to put the markers down the hallway without those little bodies there and sort of getting in the way of that piece of it. Students would learn asynchronously on those 3 days. Wednesday is already an asynchronous day. And then we're looking at the start to be full in person on March 18th. That would be K to 5, and they would be in person from the 18th, the 19th, and the 22nd. You'll see it diverges here a little bit because we have parent-teacher conferences. So on March 23rd, we're looking at full in-person for our 1st through 5th grade. On that day, there is no school for kindergarten anyway, because that's parent-teacher conferences. On March 24th, it is a half day for 1st through 5th grade, because that would be the first of our half days, which is built into the 4.5 day model. And then there is no school for kindergarten, again, because of conferences. March 25th and 26th in the elementary schools is parent-teacher conference times. So there are no school for K through 5, and then we go into spring break. One other thing that I really want to mention, and I don't think I can say this strongly enough, that this timeline is happening if the school board votes in this way. At the same time, teachers are preparing for conferences. Those conferences are an important benchmark in the communication between our teachers and our parents for what is happening at home. And the data that we normally have in abundance and at our fingertips is stuff that we have to dig for a little bit deeply. Some of it is observational. In some cases, we're looking at a student who might be transferring to a new teacher. And so we want to make sure that there's a data handoff that happens and that can be coincided with these parent-teacher conferences. So teachers typically during this time are doing that work to prepare for a parent-teacher conference at the same time that they're teaching. This is a third level because they're going to be changing their modality and what teaching and learning looks like at the same time they're preparing for parent-teacher conferences and looking at what they've been doing already in the old modality. So we're talking about 3 different things happening at once. I think for the sanity of teachers, for the safety of the students, for the work that has to get done, we really stand by this timeline as the earliest that we can do. And I believe I'm handing it off to Dr. Palmer. Yes?
You are, Denise. Thank you. So we're moving into the health and safety assurances. And I said I would be back to talk a little bit more. So let me recap what I mentioned. What's really new since the last time we came together as a board meeting are 3 significant pieces of guidance that we've received. On February 12th, we received the CDC operational strategy for K-12 schools. That's what I'm looking as that macro guidance, the guidance that they're offering to all of the schools in the nation. Then moving down a little bit more regionally, we've received information from the CHOP blog, and that's where we were learning in their guidance to look at the CDC numbers and look at them as guide rails, but to also look at what our specific experience is and look at the mitigation strategies that we have in place and know our own community in light of the strategies that the CDC is saying. And when I say that the strategies that they have are the strategies that we are using, the point where we diverge with guidance is the CDC strongly requesting or strongly giving us the guidance to use the 6 feet, where the CHOP blog is to ask us to put it in perspective. And the Chester County Health Department, in the letter that we received from Jean Franklin on Friday, talks about the conditions under which we could remove or move from the 6-foot guidance. So Nora, if you'd advance me one more, please. In Jean's letter to us, I'm going to repeat this again because it really was significant and the emphasis was added in her letter. It says, because of the layered mitigation measures you have successfully implemented, and the "you" is all of the school districts in Delaware County and Chester County, the measures you have successfully implemented, we support schools increasing more in-person learning through reduced physical distancing. Specifically, when certain community transmission levels are met and layered mitigation strategies are continued, schools are encouraged to reduce physical distancing as outlined below. And the below is that grid that I was talking about. So it has the 4 categories with the low, moderate, high, and very high. And then when you look at the columns that are the 7-day incidence and the 7-day percent positivity, the breakdown is exactly the same that's in the CDC. They just call the high and the very high something different at the CDC. But the metrics that are in here are exactly the same. But when we look at the physical distancing in the right column, you will see if we are looking at the bottom in the very high category, they strongly recommend that there's 6-foot distancing for students, and they state that it's 6 feet is required for staff. And that's the piece that they were focusing on when we meet in our regular meetings. They would like us to keep the largest distance for our staff members. That's where the higher incidents occur. And for our younger children, Jean would even like to see us phase in a return to school as opposed to saying everyone in K-12. She liked the phased approach with us working with our youngest ones first. But if we were to move from the very high category into either the low, moderate, or high, so the lowest possible categories of incidents in our community, she is saying at that point, 6 feet distancing to the greatest extent possible is recommended. So in all of these, she is not requiring, or she is not using the wording that is saying requiring the 6 feet. They're recommended and strongly recommended. And that's a critical divergence from the CDC. Almost everything else, though, that they are talking about in their document, and when we got the document, it was advanced wording to what the guidance will be. It was given to us in the form of the letter. It is on board docs, as I had mentioned, and we are anticipating that the entire guidance that we receive will be updated this week. I just haven't seen it yet. So where are we? And the next slide, Nora, please. We are right now in our most current week at 109.22 is our incident rate per 100,000. So that does put us in to the very high category. But the PCR positivity is 6.42, which puts us in the moderate category. So we know the numbers are coming down. When Dr. Brennan and Dr. Rubin and Ms. Franklin have been on the call, everybody has been talking about the time to do the planning is now. The rates are coming down. We're anticipating that they will be moving down, and I'm hopeful that they will be under the 100 for the next week. I certainly won't know, but based on the conversation we've been having, we're anticipating that the numbers will be going down. But we look like we're on a good trajectory at this point. And then I know Gina is going to pick up after me and then Ferg after her, and they're going to drill down into pretty much the pieces that we have in place in the district. Some of this you heard last time and some will be new.
Thank you, Dr. Palmer. Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to come and talk again. Some of what I'm going to talk about tonight is a repeat and just a refresh from last time we spoke, but there's also some new information that's included in the update to the health and safety plan. So we'll cover that. The first slide is really a reference and a reminder of what we had talked about. We're looking at nothing less than that 3 feet. So shooting from the 3 feet. When we talked, we had really spoken about 3 to 4 feet, somewhere in there, depending on the class sizes. However, at lunch, recess, snack, or lunch, snack, and mass breaks, we're going to maintain that 6 feet. So we talked about how the elementary principals are currently working to identify alternative areas, such as stages, such as the other areas of the building. Students will continue to be cohorted for recess, and they'll work in different areas on that playground area. Additionally, they'll continue to be staggered schedules so that we're limiting the number of any group in a hallway at any given time. We're still working on those protocols now that we have the data and the numbers of what students would be coming in and what students will be leaving, who has requested transportation. The principals are working through that information and we're moving closer every day. Additionally, as students enter the building, they'll maintain that 3 feet distance. And as we know, students coming into the building are often wait somewhere prior to going to their classrooms. So the principals are in the process of identifying those specific areas because we know that we will need additional space.
The next bullet is a bullet that we talked a lot about at last meeting. So we are moving towards the implementation of the by next testing. We anticipate that that will be in place by March 1st. So that is our goal. We definitely know we will be in place before any type of return to school would occur. We will be starting with the staff and then looking to expand to those very targeted student groups, but starting with the staff first. The next part is the one that we didn't necessarily talk about as much last time, which is the Q test. We have not yet been trained on the Q test, and that is one of our holdups. We also don't have the Q devices. So a by-next test is a rapid test. A Q test is a PCR test. So if someone were to become positive on the rapid test, we then would be doing the Q test. We would be able to do that in-house. At this point, we're just waiting. Our nursing department is in process of getting that training, and we're waiting. We did receive information from Jean today indicating that that is slightly on hold because of some data, but we anticipate that that hurdle to be overcome rather quickly. As I indicated, we had our little show of additional PPE of our shields and guards. There will be things like that. The last bullet on this page is that we will continue to contact trace. So our nursing department has been greatly involved in that contact tracing, identifying any close contacts, really doing that investigation. I cannot state how important it is that parents still continue to complete the survey. So having that survey allows us to move forward and really look at that contact tracing even closer. The next two slides are the new information slides. So as of tonight, the revision that is in front of you for the health and safety plan speaks to a change in quarantine. This alternative quarantine was brought forward as a possibility from Chester County Health Department in the middle to end of December. However, one key component that they talked about at that time was access to testing and that turnaround time. And at that time, we didn't have that accessibility. We now have a CHOP site that can test kids and turn that around rather quickly. And we know that we're going to have the by next testing. So within the health and safety plan, it's recommending that we move towards that change because we're confident in the fact that we have the capacity to ensure safety. So the previous health and safety plan, if you looked under the section of visitors, it said that any staff, student, vendor, visitor, and many other options, if they came in close contact or were exhibiting symptoms, they would need to quarantine, or close contact, they need to quarantine for 14 days. That specific wording has been removed to indicate that we will follow the guidance of the Chester County Health Department. When we wrote this the first time, that wasn't even an option out there. Now that all of the different components are coming together, we feel very confident that we can move forward. And then the last slide that I will speak to speaks to those changes specifically. So instead of having a 14-day quarantine, it will move to either a 10 or 7-day quarantine. So if an individual is a close contact and chooses not to be tested, they will have to quarantine for 10 days. If they receive a test and have negative results on day 5, then they will be able to come out of quarantine on day 7. The most important part of this, though, is that the individual remains asymptomatic. If symptoms begin at any point, then they need to remain they actually would move from quarantine into isolation at that point because they would be deemed a probable case. We think, again, given the fact that we have these testing abilities, we feel confident moving forward. This is highlighted because it is a cut and paste and a screenshot of what was in the CCHD. Again, the asymptomatic part is the key part to this. And so our nursing department will be working very closely with staff and with families to ensure that the test was done at the accurate time and that it was the correct test and that the individuals remain asymptomatic. Next up will be Ferg to speak to the other components of health and safety.
Thank you, Gina. And most of what I have to say is a repeat from previous presentations. And at all locations, we have hand sanitizer, we have disinfectant, and we have alcohol wipes. That's all locations. We also are disinfecting and cleaning the frequently touched surfaces throughout the day and at evening. Twice weekly, we have the whole building is disinfected. We have employed, or we have started using machinery that creates a charge to the disinfectant, and we go around and we fog a room, the surfaces in the room, and with the electrostatically charged nature of the disinfectant, it will be attracted to the surfaces and we achieve a better disinfection process. During the day, our custodians are going out and using that same process on the playground equipment. Our drinking fountains are closed. Shared devices and materials are disinfected between uses. Our teachers and staff have found creative ways to accomplish this quickly, and it's effective. We are monitoring our climate conditions daily. We have all our HVAC systems are hooked into a Honeywell software program where we can monitor the climate conditions. We have increased the fresh air intake. We've done that through a couple different mechanisms. We open windows whenever we can. It's a little bit more difficult in the winter when it's really cold, as it has been, but windows are opened as frequently as possible. We've also increased the fresh air intake through our HVAC systems. At our older buildings, we do that manually, and at our newer buildings, we do it through the Honeywell software system. We are increasing ventilation by turning the systems on earlier and then turning them off later. We have turned on ventilation systems that we have typically not needed to use in the past. All ventilation systems are running throughout the entire day. We have employed higher rated filters. There's a characterization for filter ratings called the MERV factor. And you can go, and MERV basically is the higher the MERV rating, the more the filter will catch. And most buildings will use, in a school districts or in school settings, will use a MERV rated of 8. We are now using MERV rated filters of 13 in our central systems. Now, we do this, we don't do this because a more dense filter catches more stuff. And we want circulation, we want the air moving. And also systems need to move that air through the machinery. And we have gone through each one of our elementary buildings and brought in an outside company to test the air turnover rate or air exchange rate. The recommendation for air exchange rates has always been 4 to 6. When the COVID crisis hit and a lot of information came out, they were recommending 4 to 6 in a variety of areas. After testing our systems, the minimum in any one of our elementary classrooms is 10. It goes from 10 all the way up to 27. So the minimum turnover rate is 10. And what that means is over in the course of 1 hour, the volume of air in the room is being turned over 10 times. It's going through the ventilation systems 10 times. Okay. And that does it for my section. Denise, do you want to say thanks to everybody or you want me to keep going? I think you can do a much better job. Come on up.
I didn't know I was the final speaker, but I'm always willing to close the show. A lot of work has gone into this and from all levels, from the school board, administration, Dr. Palmer, our teachers for sure, and the parents. We really, Dr. Grandy talked about this at the beginning. We really are pulling together as a community to make choices for our students, to make the best teaching and learning environment possible for them. I think the one thing we all agree on is that the children are at the heart of why we're doing what we're doing. And the decisions that we make based on that is a team effort. So I would really like to thank everybody for the extra hours. These people behind me, they pick up the phone whenever I call. It doesn't matter if it's a Sunday night. It doesn't matter if it's a Friday at 10. They pick up the phone, they're doing the work. Last time I was remiss and I didn't thank the administration, and I want to make sure that I do that this time. So thank you guys. You've really been great. And at this point, we can take questions. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'll look in the room and I'll look on Zoom. Anyone in the room? Kelly?
I want to just also thank all of you for all the effort you put in. I know how much time you've spent with us and taking our questions, and I can't even imagine how many times that's magnified outside of that. So thank you. We truly appreciate it. I think, one question, possibly two. Ferg, one is for you. I know you went through, we know that air circulation, even though strangely the CDC didn't really comment on that so much, that it is actually quite important. And so I'm really excited to hear the data that you shared. I know that you also looked at our small spaces that don't have some of those same capacities. And could you comment on, I know you had positive results on those as well, and air change there.
You mean our smaller classrooms in the
Yeah, like
studies we did?
Yeah, the little small rooms for specialists perhaps.
Sure. I should also say that last summer, we went through every space in the district. The HVAC technician that works for the district and myself, we went through every space. And the vast number of spaces fall into several categories. You have the large classrooms, you have the smaller classrooms. And when we measured the smaller classroom sizes, the air turnover rate was at 8. Okay. So once again, if 6 is your highest in the recommended, we were at 8 for those smaller size classrooms.
Great.
But we have gone through every single space, and back in the summer, if we found any spaces that we had any kind of concern about, because in all schools, you will take a space and use it. If it was a closet, we'll find a better use for it than a closet. And I speak jokingly, but we've used spaces, but we've gone through every single space and analyzed every space for the proper ventilation requirements. But to answer your question specifically, the air exchange rate for our smaller classrooms would be 8.
Thank you very much.
I just have one follow-up on that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. On that as well, when you were first talking about the air exchanges, you said the recommendation is 4 to 6. Is that per day? Or
That's 4 to, and I'm sorry if I didn't, my mistake. That's 4 to 6 per hour.
okay, that's the recommendation, and our schools are where per hour?
The minimum of our large classrooms was 10.
Okay, and the smaller areas is 8.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Chapin?
Thank you. This is for Dr. Wheeler. I just wanted to make sure I'm getting the big picture and I have this correct. So please correct me if I'm wrong. But of the something like 1,097 families, 1,400 something students, right? There are only 32 families moving from current cohort into online academy and something like 38 students. Is that right?
With the qualification that the principals gave, because they did some additional digging, but went from the actual survey results, that's what we came up with.
Okay, because that's very small number of a very big, much larger. It's a pretty small percentage of a bigger number.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you. I just want to make sure I had that right.
Yeah, and their numbers in and of itself were only a few different, like a couple of students, so would not have changed the overall percentage that much.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
I just wanted to make a comment, and this is in response to Gina, what you presented about the quarantine. You don't need to get up. I'm just commenting. I want to say that I am really excited about the approach that you're talking about with respect to testing, with respect to people in quarantine, because one of the things that's happened throughout the pandemic is people get put into quarantine, they stay home for a couple of weeks. In many cases, they never get tested. And you never really know whether or not they, like the exposure that they had led to, whether they actually had COVID and they were just asymptomatic. And so one of the great benefits of instituting this program is I think it really gives us a tremendous sense of data about anytime someone goes into quarantine, did they actually get COVID or not? And up until now, that's been sort of a missing piece of data for lots of school districts and lots of organizations. And so, it's like many colleges and stuff are doing routine testing now, as are many other organizations. So anyway, I just want to say how excited I am about our ability to do testing of people who are in quarantine. I think it makes a big difference in terms of the information that we get. And it also makes a big difference in terms of how much school kids need to miss and be quarantined at home. So, Matt.
Can I ask a follow-up to that, which was, we've gotten a bunch of correspondence lately about whole teams that have to quarantine and what that means for their season and potential postseason. Does adopting that change to the health and safety plan address some of that?
I can answer that question. Yes, it does. It certainly does address that. So the information that I've shared with school nurses is that should the health and safety plan revision be approved, tomorrow we'll be revisiting any individual who is currently in quarantine. And then moving forward, that would be the implementation.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
I had one other follow-up, which
Sure.
was for Ferg.
Yeah.
I think he's still out there, I'd assume. Thanks, Ferg. I know you've looked at the different desk spacing configurations, and I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that in light of the numbers that we saw for the elementary school classrooms, where we're seeing, somewhere in the 14 to 23, 24, even 26 students on occasion.
Right. So in the overall, in elementary classrooms, full-size elementary classrooms, a 4-foot spacing will produce on average 22 students per class. At 3.5 feet, you can fit 26 students in the class. Those 26 students or 22 students are seated in desks, all faced in the same direction, very similar to the manner we have now where we have the 6-foot spacing. And they're structured typically in a either a 4-row by 6 across or a 4-row by 7 across, minus a couple seats within that configuration. So 6 by 4 is 24, minus 2 is 22, and then 7 times 4 is 28, minus 2, which is 26. This allows also space at the front of an elementary classroom for the teacher to maintain that required 6-foot spacing. It also allows for the technology setup that a teacher would have. And typically in an elementary classroom, there's another teaching area. So basically it's taking the front of the classroom, allowing that 6-foot space for the teacher. And then you have this grid of 6 by 4, 7 by 4 rows of student desks.
Thank you. And for the elementary school classrooms where the kids aren't switching classroom throughout the day, if it's a classroom that only has 16 kids or 18 kids, are we only going to put 16 or 18 desks in the classroom?
Yes, and because it's different than the middle school or the high school where you don't have different groups of students coming in, yes, we would definitely take away desks unless they provide a benefit that help guide traffic in one direction or another.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, I want to echo, do you have a question? Oh, go for it.
A question about in the health and safety plan, it currently indicates, it talks about music programs and so forth. And presently it indicates that string musicians would still need to, would still be at 6 feet. I was wondering if the board were to approve the proposal that's on the table, might the string students in the elementary buildings be able to be at 3 feet and therefore be able to accommodate more ensemble type practices?
Yes, that was actually an edit that we made today to that, to reflect as students are coming in. We know that strings are individuals who just need to have their mask on. There is no exhaling.
Right.
So yes, certainly. Additionally, I'm working very closely with the music department. They're in the process of finalizing their plans for bringing back more students to in-person music. So we're able to identify masks that we've approved as being safe for musical instruments, and they are ordered, and our fingers are crossed that they will be here within 2 weeks. We already have the vast majority of the bell covers for the instruments. And so we are anticipating that by the beginning or just slightly after the very beginning of March, we will be able to bring instrumentalists in at a 9, 12, and eventually as rates decrease even further into a 6-foot distance.
Wonderful. I had one more question on the health and safety plan that I almost forgot to ask you. There's on page 24, and I think it's in another spot also, it talks about it states that students may choose to participate in online learning if they're unable or unwilling to return to school. I wanted to just confirm that means our online academy, not zooming into the classroom if they choose to remain virtual.
I will allow Dr. Jones to answer it if she doesn't like my answer, if it's not clear enough. But yes, it is referencing our online academy.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you again. Oh, I don't think her hand's up, is it?
It was up for a minute, but I no longer have a question.
Oh, okay, sorry. I looked, it wasn't up. So I want to, again, echo what others have said and thank all of you for an extraordinary amount of work. I know even the survey alone involved an enormous amount of contacting of families. And I'm trying to remember what Mr. Savage said. I think it was a team growth opportunity. Is that how you described it? I'm sure that's exactly what you meant. So absolutely. So thank you again for all the work you've done on this. And so with that, we do have another focus topic. So I'm going to let Dr. Palmer introduce that one.
We do have another focus topic. And this evening, we have spent a lot of time talking about the elementary school. And in past meetings, we've talked a lot about the high school. Tonight, we're going to focus on the middle school. And Steve Kroll, assistant principal at the middle school, is with us with a focus on middle school athletics. What's in the works?
Here we go. Well, I think you guys will be glad to hear that I don't expect to be quite as lengthy as our last presentation, but it's all good. But I did want to thank you guys for allowing me to come this evening. I know there's a lot on the table here. There's a lot to be discussed and continue to be shared this evening, but I did want to share a brief update on the evolving plans of the middle school with regard to providing some opportunities for playing come the spring sports season. So we're getting there, and you can kind of see from the picture, not really quite sure where we're heading. That's sort of a little bit of a preview into what you'll hear tonight, because there is a lot going on with our Central League middle schools and discussions that have really kind of picked up within the last week or so. So we're anticipating, the next month to really provide a lot more clarity, but I'm going to let you know where we are as far as today. The team at the middle school has been working in collaboration with other local middle schools, athletic departments, and administrative teams, and we are regularly reviewing updated levels of interest to compete and interact interscholastically this spring with our middle school sports programs. There are still logistical challenges and hurdles to overcome, but we are confident that we will be able to provide some sort of sporting experiences for our students at Strathaven Middle School this spring. Somewhat of a small hurdle that was overcome this winter was getting off the ground some after-school clinics, specifically with basketball. Those activities are actually due to wrap up this week, but I wanted to thank all involved for helping run those after-school sessions, Mr. Tagliatella, our athletic director, and Mr. Lucas and Mr. Huffnell for stepping up to sponsor and coach those activities. I know that the coaches felt the clinics were successful and the students involved were really thrilled to have the opportunity to play and be active. And I think between the two cohorts in the last few weeks, we've had anywhere from 30 to 40 students participating per week in their cohort. But I think they're very excited to have the opportunity to return to some sort of semblance of normalcy. I know it was definitely not the same as a regular winter season for basketball, but they were really thrilled to be there. So that was exciting for us. This won't maybe let me remote, so maybe we'll just go to the next slide. There we go. Thanks, AJ. As we turn our attention now to spring, we also want to refocus the opportunities to enhance those experiences that we were sort of able to kind of put together this winter for our student athletes that are willing to play, as well as take some smaller steps towards the opening up of competition with other schools. Listed here are the sports and clubs that we are looking to open for the spring season. We are, in a sense, building the plane as it is taking off, as the middle school has not encountered facing these challenges yet, unlike our high school counterparts. For instance, in a normal season, league assigners schedule the entire league of games for all schools. And right now, our league of middle schools are still in a period of wait and see of which schools are willing and allowed to participate interscholastically. There are a range of options that all middle schools are weighing, from running no activities at all to running some intramural programs to running some interscholastic competition, which we're hoping to do by holding a fewer amount of games and events that would probably typically take place in a regular sports season, spring sports season. We are continuing to get commitments from our coaches at this time from both our internal employees, such as our teachers, as well as coaches that work outside of our school buildings. Thanks. For what we are certain of at this moment are the following. Safety continues to be the #1 priority of our schools and athletic program, and this will lead to modifications in a spring season. The middle school will continue to follow the spring-summer WSSD health and safety plan for competition and voluntary workouts, and that was amended a few weeks ago to include the middle school to follow that plan, as we were not included originally. We are projecting a tentative start date of Monday, April 5th, after the spring recess. And that would most typically be for our teams to start meeting regularly, to start practicing. I know that some of the athletic directors are looking at the potential to start some interscholastic activities about April 19th. So we have some time to work this out and figure out, what logistical hurdles we need to overcome. But that right now is the tentative timeline for us. We intend to run activities in each of our spring sports: girls and boys track, softball, baseball, girls and boys lacrosse, and our ultimate club team. At the very least, these would be activity clinics to focus on skill development, social interaction, and an opportunity to exercise and be physically active. However, we do have the desire to continue to work towards interscholastic competition with other eligible schools this spring. We will continue to work with our coaches on designing practices in the cohort model. We would adjust our practice schedules and expectations if at any time our school model changes at the middle level. Students will need to acquire an updated PIAA physical from their doctor's office, their walk-in clinic, or an urgent care facility that schedule appointments. So families are recommended now, if they're hearing this message, hopefully, and we can start spreading the news, to start looking into those appointments now, because I know that, particularly in this era, that, doctor's appointments are, timely to get. But this is a requirement based on the fact that in any interscholastic activities and competition between schools sanctioned by PIAA require that health and information to participate. And it's just good safety information for us to have as well. In closing, I just want to take the opportunity to, again, more clearly define our two main objectives here, which are the following. One is to continue to expand and provide sporting opportunities that we know and enhance, they really support our physical, social, and mental health of our students. There's an abundance of research that supports the positive effects of regular physical activity on our overall health. And we are thrilled to be thinking of spring, particularly after a day like today, when getting outside, getting back to a more normal semblance of our springtime routine at school is something that many of us are welcoming, albeit on a modified version. And secondly, this allows us to take a smaller, but yet significant and important step towards our gradual reopening of our schools in a safe, structured, and purposeful manner. These avenues and scenarios that we are exploring and reviewing continue to be picked apart and questioned by sort of these planning teams, but the middle school levels and our building team, as we're going to try to mitigate and minimize as many potential issues and challenges as possible. But that will be some things that we'll have to work through as they come along. But it does allow us to take that small step towards our complete school form with everything that we're used to providing. So we're excited to be, looking at this. It's not all figured out. If I'm sure if you'd call many of these other local middle schools, we feel like we're in the same boat. We're trying to work on this together, get our timelines together, and really, offer some more opportunities for our students this spring. But it's something that we're excited to be doing. So thank you for allowing me to, kind of provide you with this update tonight. I know our middle school students and families will be excited to hear this as our district as a whole. But if, I'll be glad to take any questions if you have any at this point for me this evening.
Well, I'll just say thank you again for working on this. I know, we've ended up talking a lot about the high school over the course of the year. So it's great to hear, the work that's happening at the middle school. The spring sports, I'm trying to remember from the list you showed, these are all outdoor sports, right?
They
There's
are,
nothing
yeah.
going on indoors.
Which I think, brings another level of comfortability for us. We didn't fully take on the winter season. I think as we were looking at doing something similar to this in the fall, we actually had some fall activities planned that were outdoors. And it sort of coincided with some rising numbers in the COVID cases at the time. And I think we just felt it was better to err on the side of caution. We got the basketball clinics off the ground. And I think that was a big step for us, even mentally, to just say we were able to do this. We haven't seen any issues with it. We had a good turnout from our students. The coaches and the kids were excited to be there. So, looking towards spring and towards what we kind of think of as, the light at the end of the tunnel, I think being outside just brings that next level of comfortability for us to feel like, this could be the right time for us to make the move carefully and cautiously, but purposefully.
Other questions or comments? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have a good evening.
All right, that takes us to audience recognition for response to items for action on the agenda this evening. As a reminder, public comment is a time for district residents and taxpayers to speak to the board about an issue that is before the board or may come before the board. It is a time for us to listen and hear perspectives and experiences from our community. And while we can't answer questions at the meeting, there's always an opportunity to follow up after meetings if there is a specific question for the district. As I've mentioned at other meetings, we do have two methods to comment: in person and by phone. For members of the public wishing to address the board in person, we have space here in the room as well as overflow space to maintain adequate social distancing. When it's time to speak, audience members will be guided to the meeting room to speak. Everyone must wear a mask at all times. Members of the public wishing to address the board can also call 610-892-3470, extension 1102 to leave their recorded comments for the board, subject to a 3-minute time limit. As I've mentioned, any comments left prior to 5 o'clock are transcribed and made available to the board. If it's called in after 5 o'clock but prior to the end of the meeting, it will still be transcribed, distributed to the board, and made a part of the record, but not acknowledged during the meeting. As I mentioned earlier, we've allocated 1 hour and 15 minutes during this portion of the meeting, or say up to 1 hour and 15 minutes, for topics on the agenda, and 1/2 hour during the portion set aside for topics not on the agenda, just in the interest of maintaining an orderly and efficient meeting. We do want to stick to a 3-minute limit per comment. Again, in the interest of giving as many people as possible the chance to be heard, we'll alternate between in-person and phoned-in comments. I'll ask our board secretary, Ms. Fagora, to keep time on each comment and let the speaker know when 3 minutes has elapsed. Called-in comments, I believe, have already been limited to 3 minutes in terms of what's recorded and transcribed. So at this point, I will ask Kelly to read the first called-in comment, but at the same time, invite anyone up through the hallway who would like to speak in person for after we get through the first called-in comment.
The first comment is from Lisa Squires on Osborne Lane. and this was left for us on February 13th. I'm calling to express my opinion that you need to follow the CDC guidelines. Not only am I a parent of a student, I am a healthcare provider, and everyone's safety is very important. Follow the CDC guidelines. I understand children definitely need to be in school as much as they can, but they need to be physically distanced. They need to not be eating together, unfortunately, at this time. So please follow the CDC guidance.
All right, thank you. So if we have our first in-person comment. Someone out in the hall? Okay. Come on in. So just name and
Got it.
street name is fine. And
Bob
then
Kelly, Country Club Lane, Wallingford. Just want to say thanks to everybody that put together the survey. It certainly was very encouraging from my perspective as somebody that's anxious to get the kids back into school. I hope that the board takes into consideration, those parents that are in the cohort model today and anxious to get their kids back in. Certainly there is an option, as correctly pointed out in today's presentation, for the online model, for if there is a medical condition or some other concern for students to get that online education. But I guess I'm here just to talk about what I consider the greater good. And I think everybody would agree, regardless of what side of the issue you're on, and unfortunately it has become an issue, that in-person learning is the most beneficial for a majority of students. So if we can move as quickly as possible, and I think starting with the elementary school is a great first step. And it seems like the numbers, for the most part, will work out, that we should do that as quickly as possible. And it's very encouraging to hear that we're also putting plans in place to address both the middle and high school. For those high school seniors, it's been a tough year. Your last 2 years of high school really was some of the best times of your life, potentially. And, a lot of those experiences have been taken away from those kids. So anything that we can do to try to get kids back into school, I fully endorse. And I hope that, everybody can come together to make this a reality and do it safely. And it seems like our mitigation efforts have worked very well so far, and that we are continuing to evaluate ways to make it safe for all people, students, teachers, parents, to enter a school building. So thank you very much.
thank you. All right, Kelly, you want to read the next one?
This next comment is from William Circus, Dickinson Avenue. This was also left on February 14th. I'm a parent of 4 children, 3 of whom are currently in the district. I wish to express my deep, unsettling feelings about your thoughts about reopening schools with a 3-foot distance. I believe this puts our entire community at risk based on potentially flawed data. It places our teachers at risk, and it is a wrong decision. I strongly oppose any change in our current system of hybrid and online learning. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you. Next in-person comment. Hi, come on in.
Hello. My name's Tim Edwards. I live on Brent Drive in Wallingford. And I'm here tonight to discuss the quarantining policy that was raised as an agenda item. Thank you for putting that on the agenda. Currently, it's a 14-day quarantine, and I really would love for you guys to vote yes to a 7-day quarantine with a negative test after 5 days. And what that does for us. So our current situation, I'm a parent of 2 basketball players, and I'm speaking on behalf of the basketball team, and I see some of the parents here as well. We received a letter from Chester County that we were exposed on Tuesday, February 16th. And by current policy, that puts us in quarantine till March 2nd. And eliminates us from the Central League playoffs. Our team had a Zoom meeting on Sunday to strategize, and everyone got to get on the same page. we went to CHOP and got the PCR test, and we're hoping to present negative results or whatever results they are to the administration to allow us, if we do update the policy, will allow us back on the court Wednesday. So we missed a game on Friday. We have 2 regular season games left of an already shortened schedule. It would be nice to get the game in on Wednesday that was originally scheduled for Tuesday this week, and we would finish up on Thursday with Ridley. So that would give us a total of 12 games. But most importantly, it would allow our team to compete for a Central League championship, something I really do believe these boys deserve. It's been a rough year with just the shortened season and not having an off season. So, and just the mere fact that how hard they work. And I'm sure I'm speaking for other sports as well, because I mean, updating an outdated policy to align with CDC and PA Department of Health only makes sense to me. And it's best for our students, because it could impact other sports down the line. But again, I thank you for bringing it up and putting it on the agenda. It would mean a lot for our boys to be able to compete this week, and then get it rolling, go into the playoffs, and maybe make a run, because I really think they have a chance to do it. So thank you.
Thank you.
This comment is from Chris McGinnis, Yale Avenue, Swarthmore, left on February 14th. My comment is, once that all teachers and instructors are vaccinated, I feel that is the time for students to return. I say that as a registered nurse, a grandmother, a mother, and a resident of the district. Thank you.
Thanks. Next comment. Just name and street.
Good evening, Jay Haregi from Cedar Lane in Wallingford. First of all, thank you for the time. And I got to say, this is my first board meeting, so I have an appreciation for a lot of details that you guys go through and the information that was shared and that you have to absorb and make decisions on. So I appreciate your time and a lot of effort that you guys put into all the work and decisions you're making. That being said, I'm here to represent also another child in the high school basketball team. I also will make another point regarding middle school sports as well. I have 2 middle schoolers in 7th grade. In addition to that, just to reiterate some of the things that Tim said, the basketball team has put a lot of effort, but I just want to share a different perspective. My son plays, went through the testing. It works. The recommendation, they turned around a test. We went to CHOP and we got a test within less than 24 hours. So we're here with a negative test to share with you. We presented it to the nurse. If you guys can vote towards the recommendation, he would be one that could play starting as soon as Thursday or Friday. So that's how much of an impact, even though it was on your agenda for 30 seconds or it was presented for 1 minute, that level of detail has so much impact on this team. The second point I'd like to make is just for the middle school. My kids, my 2 kids that are in 7th grade, they're hungry for sports, right? So I was glad to see it on the agenda. It was nice to see it there. They miss basketball. They see their brother play. They would love to do some for middle school, even though it wasn't available. We do what we can. Spring's coming up, baseball and lacrosse, 2 sports that they both enjoy. It'd be great to see that as well. Just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Kelly.
This comment is from Elise Katsapis, left on February 14th. We're just calling to say that I oppose the 3-foot distancing and having the students to be back to school 4.5 days. I'd like you to follow the CDC guidelines.
All right, is there another in-person comment? Why don't you go ahead and start reading the next one?
This is from Sarah Barron Samlin and David Samlin, Saybrook Lane in Wallingford, left on February 14th. I'm calling with regards to the new guidelines that were released by the CDC on Friday, February 12th. The new plan or proposed plan for reopening elementary schools 5 days a week is not in line with those CDC guidelines, which stress the need for 6-foot distancing in cohorts and pods and thorough cleaning between cohorts and pods. My husband and I were thoroughly against reopening to 5 days a week prior to those new guidelines being released, but at the same time, keeping an open mind. We now have these guidelines released. I think that it's extremely challenging that you're asking us to choose potentially between putting our children in physical danger where we're subjecting them to psychological hardship based on no physical contact with other children or complete physical contact with other children 5 days a week. I think that what is prudent is to take our time. There are a lot of viral variants out there. There's a lot to consider here, and what we have right now with the cohort model is working for most students. I understand that some students are struggling, and I'm not trying to discount that, but please understand that there are other ways to support those individual children by bringing them in on those cohort days or something like that, rather than subjecting all children that they'd have to be in school for 5 days a week, therefore subjecting them and their family members to higher risk. Or they have to do virtual school, which basically means that they have no contact with their peers, which is psychologically damaging to children of that age group or of any age group. And I think that's a mistake. I really do, and also my husband, that we want to voice that. So thank you for your time, and we hope that you will keep this in mind moving forward. Thank you. This is from Christian Dick on Drexel Road in Swarthmore, left on February 14th. I'm a parent of a 4th grader in SRS. I just want to let you know that I oppose the school opening with 4.5 days and the distance of students being less than 6 feet. I believe it should be 3 feet. I do not agree with that. Thank you very much. This is from Aaron Hosbach, School Lane in Swarthmore, left February 14th. I filled out the online survey. I just wanted to call and reaffirm via this voicemail that I'm opposed to the 4.5 day proposal. It brings staff and students back with only 3 feet consideration between them. It is against CDC guidelines. It just does not make sense. It does not keep our teachers safe with the vaccine right around the corner. I don't understand why we would ever push the situation for a few weeks or a month or so at school. I'm against that and wanted to reinforce that. Thank you. This is from Lena Flower, Drexel Place, Swarthmore, left February 15th. I've previously called in to oppose the board's plan to go to the 4.5 day plan, but after reviewing the scientific evidence and talking to people who've done more research about this, I'm now in support of the 4.5 day plan. I feel like the students should be going back and the school district will do it safely. Thank you. This is from Colleen Duskus, Scott Lane in Wallingford, left February 15th. I'm writing and sharing an email that I just wrote to you to share my opposition to the possible plan to return elementary students to school 4.5 days per week at this time. I strongly support remaining in the hybrid model until the CDC guidelines support 3 feet social distancing. I have a medically fragile high school student with special needs at home who is learning virtually. We chose the hybrid model for my 5th grade son because that was the best choice for him. We made this decision knowing that the class size would be cut in half and 6 feet of social distancing would be adhered. Switching to 5.5 days for all elementary student changes all of that, and it is not what we signed up for in the hybrid model. Putting my son in the online academy at this point in his 5th grade school year at MP when he's 2 months or 3 months away from graduating is not a fair or reasonable option for him. That would be emotionally detrimental to him at this point. He has sacrificed enough to keep his sister safe, and we will not ask that of him. We have come this far. Why are we considering unsafe options at this point when we are so close to doing it safely? Please vote to keep the hybrid model in place until the CDC guidelines support 3 feet distancing as a safe and viable option. We want these kids to go back. I don't want to keep my kids at home, but I want to keep the teachers safe, and I want to keep my son safe, and ultimately keep my family safe. Until the CDC says the 6 feet is safe, this option is not safe. For many of us hybrid parents, you're leaving us no option but to send our children into what we feel is an unsafe situation. That's something that no parent should ever be put in. Thank you for your time, and I hope that you will consider my request. Thank you.
All right, we have an in-person comment. In-person comment? Yes. Please come on.
Good evening, and thank you to the board for allowing us to discuss this. And my comment is about returning to full-time in-person learning now. My name is John Lenart. I'm at West Rose Valley Road in Wallingford. I think we would all agree that we are not any different than any of the other local school districts or even states that have already opened for full-time in-person learning without an increased incidence rate of COVID, either among staff, support personnel, obviously the students, or families, which is very heartwarming, I think, to everyone from a humanistic perspective. The science and guidelines supports returning to full-time in-person learning now. even without, unfortunately, teacher vaccinations. And that's not my opinion. That's per the CDC guidelines and was in the letter, I think, that Dr. Palmer had spoken of earlier. Also, the dropping rates of positivity and the incidence rates are almost within the levels for in-person 3-foot distance learning, which is fantastic. And those rates continue to drop, I believe, from 140 to 109 in the most recent data. And we're already below the positivity rates, I believe around 7%. What I took away most, and hopefully more importantly, those voting members tonight, is it was encouraging to hear the district's preparation, which was fantastic, the local resident support, and the CHOP guidance as well, or opinions supporting the return to full-time in-person learning, at least for our elementary schools at the distance of 3 foot or less. But I guess the last thing I have to say is there's an opportunity for each of you voting tonight on the return to learning for the elementary schools, that really to examine your thoughts and really to think about it from a student's perspective. You know, I appreciated Dr. Grande's comments earlier about there's not sides, and I don't think there is either. It's really just about what's best for the children. And I would just ask you, and I think many parents who have been supportive and not supportive of it would say, what do you think is best for every student? Because that's really who you're voting about. And that there's a large majority of families that are desperately looking for your guidance and your leadership to return to in-person learning full-time as early as possible, certainly with elementary schools first, and hopefully with others soon to follow. Thanks very much for your time and all the work you do.
Thank you. Kelly, you want to read the next one?
This is from Kelly Weiler, Governor's Drive in Wallingford, left February 15th. I have a 3rd grader and a 5th grader at SRS. I'm opposed to the children returning to school at this time. They are in a hybrid schedule. I think that starting the transition back to full-time towards the end of the year is in poor taste due to the fluidity of COVID with the new mutations and strains and our teachers not being vaccinated. I think that the kids have been through so much this past year with COVID that it is a disservice to them to abruptly disrupt their schedule and bring them back into a classroom where they're not actually safe. We don't know the structure of the buildings. We don't know ventilation systems, not keeping them 3 feet apart, etc. With that being said, the effect that will do with the teachers if they have to get taken out of school due to anybody being exposed to a positive COVID case in their classrooms. I think that the focus at this time for the school board should be to stop worrying about the rest of this school year and continue with whatever families have in place, which would be hybrid or online, or letting the online academy people switch over to hybrid if they choose to. I think the focus now needs to be looked at for fall of 2021 and spring of 2022, because COVID will still be here and what you are planning on doing then. That's where our money for the taxpayers needs to go into, for the kids and for their mental health. Also for their mental health, in addition to the hybrid, start offering services. Put the energy and time into that versus trying to rush people back into school and you're not being prepared for it. That's where the money should be spent. That's where the focus should be spent. I agree that I have a child with IEP issues. They have wonderful counselors at SRS that we have utilized. I can't speak highly enough about it. They embraced my family who directly was affected by COVID-19, and one of my family members is a long hauler, so I know how serious this is. If honestly you do full-time, I will pull my child from the school district and will pay for private school. And what would be the point of me paying the taxes to live in the school district to have to do that? This is just not a safe plan, it's a rough plan. Again, stop wasting the time on 2021 spring and focus on fall 2021 and spring 2022. Do it the right way. You guys have had plenty of time to figure it out. It's going to be a fluid situation in the fall. We're going to be doing a flow again and so on and so forth. So please do not open school full time. Keep it at a hybrid and an online academy for the safety of all the staff, teachers, and students. Put the energy into that and put this to bed once and for all. Get these kids extra resources for mental health issues if they so need it. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you have a comment? Yeah, come on in. Just name and street and
Sure.
Yeah, welcome.
Allison Carpin. I live at 308 Martin Lane in Wallingford. So I just wanted to make two comments. One is, first and foremost, I agree firmly that we need to stick to 6 feet. 3 feet is not enough. And I was just counting how many people are in this giant room. And I think there's 22 people in here. My child's class would have 27 people in it, maybe one less now, 26. So I just find it interesting that we're all sitting here 6 feet apart, but we're going to ask our kids to sit 3 feet apart. Beyond that, I think our kids have been really accustomed to being 6 feet from people. I think all of us have been really proud of our kids for how much they've adjusted to this new normal that we're all living in. They know they have to wear their masks, and they know how far they need to stand from people. And so the idea that we're gonna now suddenly at one certain day have them pour into a classroom with 27 kids in it is gonna put my kid at extreme anxiety. And I think we need to think about this, not just from our adult perspectives and our brains and our maps of how many feet apart people need to be, but really what the experience is gonna be like for our kids. I think we're gonna need to phase this in. I think they're gonna need to have time to be able to move from this far apart to somebody to being really close to them, because it's not gonna settle well with them at all. And I'm not sure that we're in their minds on that. And last, I have to speak up for the teachers. I mean, if we're not willing to be in this room together for 2 hours, 3 feet apart, then how is it that we expect our teachers really to do their best job, not just today, but to believe that we have faith in them in the future? Because in this district, we put a lot of pressure on our teachers, right? I've been in your chair. I know that we've asked them to do new reading curriculum, new math curriculum. We change it over all the time, math, 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 math. We're gonna ask them to go the extra mile after having told them that they need to be in a classroom without a vaccine, 3 feet, and I know we're supposed to be 6 feet apart, but how are they supposed to talk to a kid in the class? What's the point? They can't be that close to them to help them with instructional needs. So I just wanted to share those points with you all, and thank you for your consideration today.
Thank you. Oh, you want to read the next one?
Christy McGuire on Westminster Drive in Wallingford left February 21st. I'm calling to urge you to vote yes to bring all students back for full-time in-person instruction, beginning with the elementary students. We are approaching 1 year without full-time in-person instruction. If we wait to act on this plan, it is more likely that it will be 1.5 years before our students are back in classrooms full-time. With graduate degrees in both education and biomedical science, I'm able to read the literature in both fields and weigh the risks. The risks of continuing to deny our children full-time in-person education clearly outweigh the risks from COVID-19. 40% of schools across the country and even more around the world have shown that full-time in-person instruction can be done safely, even without 6 feet of distancing between students. Meanwhile, our students are falling behind. I want to make it clear that I am not anti-union or anti-teacher. In fact, my husband and I are both educators who are back to teaching in person without yet being vaccinated. So we are not asking WSSD faculty and staff to do something we are unwilling to do ourselves. We made sacrifices to move to this district because of the excellent schools and are disappointed that anyone would prevent a family from choosing to send their child back to school for full-time in-person instruction. This needs to be the default for public education. Do our schools need more funding? Yes. Should all teachers be prioritized for vaccinations? Yes. But we cannot hold up the preparations for reopening while these things are happening. Every day not in school is a loss for our children, and they have already lost so much this past year. I am asking you as school board members to please put our children's education first and vote yes to begin the process of bringing all students back for full-time in-person instruction as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Just go ahead and read the next one.
Christine Dole, Haverford Place, Swarthmore, left February 22nd. I'm calling regarding tonight's board meeting and the decision to return to 4.5 days in person with 3 feet of distancing. Unfortunately, I think we need to be clear that while testing adds another layer of mitigation strategy, for the most recent February 12th CDC update, schools should prioritize 2 mitigation strategies. Number 1, universal masking, and number 2, physical distancing of at least 6 feet to the greatest extent possible. These are identified as top priorities and having the greatest potential for reducing transmission. The CDC goes on to state that while the risk of exposure may be lower when indications of community spread are lower, this risk is also dependent upon the implementation of school and community mitigation strategies. For example, if community transmission is low, but mitigation strategies are not implemented or inconsistently implemented, the risk of exposure and transmission will increase. In addition, for the Chester County Health Department, the most current guidance specifies 6 feet of separation throughout the day to the maximum extent feasible. If 6 feet cannot be maintained due to space limitations, schools should consider alternate options such as hybrid. If evidence exists that indicates improvement in cases, transmissions, deaths, hospitalizations, etc., schools may consult with the CCHD about transitioning to in-person with less than 6 feet. I urge the board to carefully consider this guidance as it has from the beginning. It seems to me that each school and district's circumstances for doing them safely will vary greatly, which is the reason for reliance on bodies such as the Chester County Health Department. In addition, in our specific circumstance, we have a large number of teaching staff who are in our buildings day in and day out, and who have expressed their concern that this may create an unsafe environment for all. This is not an easy decision, and when it comes to the health and safety of our community, it shouldn't be. Thank you for all of your work. Heidi Velhagen, Putnam Boulevard, Wallingford, left February 22nd. Dear board members, I'm calling to voice my concerns about the opening of school buildings to 4.5 days a week. Notice I say opening the school buildings instead of school opening, because schools have been open since September. This is the reality, but they have been opened. I think we should change the narrative, as saying the school opening or opening the schools is an insult to our teachers, faculty, staff, parents, and students who have been in school since September. Now, we opted to send our son to online academy. It was a very difficult decision, but we thought it would be best suited for him as our family, which is high risk. He has a 504 related to his transition skills or lack of them from social skills as well. So in order for him to have this ability, schedule, and every team, we decided to sign him up for the online academy. Thank God he's thriving, and the online academy has been way better than what we expected. Ms. Barnes, his teacher, who's in 4th grade, is an amazing teacher who gets them, keeps them engaged, and is a caring teacher. The teacher is not afraid of technology, and as far as I can see, because I'm working from home and I can hear them, all students are engaged and thriving. Now, because of all of this that is happening, we may have to put our son's routine in jeopardy, as he may lose his teacher and classmates that he's gotten accustomed to, and that would defeat the 504 because of his transition skills. If the school building is open every day and the hybrid model disappears, then he may have to lose all that stability and everything that he has accomplished so far, and I don't think it's fair. Another thing is that I don't see why the rush of opening the buildings. Why don't we focus on vaccinating our teachers and staff and start planning for a strong 2021-2022 school year opening? It will give a chance for our teachers to get protected and a chance for our community to get more people vaccinated. That will protect the teachers, the community, plus our students. I want to end by saying I work at CHOP. I attend every employee town hall that there is every week, and the recommendations haven't changed. As we saw in the meeting that we had with the CHOP doctors at the board meeting, 6 feet apart, masks, and hand washing. Thank you so much for this space, and thank you for everything you're doing. I know this is hard, but I do not agree with opening the buildings. Thank you. Julie Legati, Columbia Avenue, Swarthmore, February 22nd. It strikes me that while this has been a very divisive issue in the school district, the two positions are not in inherent opposition. An alternative would be to be creative about space in order to bring more students in person more often while maintaining safe 6-foot distancing. Danielle Morris, Ash Road, Wallingford, left February 22nd. I'm a nurse and the parent of an 11th grade student who is in the process of taking ACTs and SATs. As you can imagine, his scores are extremely lower than they would be if he was in-person learning. That being said, I know his teachers are doing the best they can with virtual and hybrid learning. I'm calling in for 2 reasons. First and foremost, to ask the board members to please vote for full-time in-person learning for our children. Time is limited for our high school kids. These current seniors will be graduating in June and have not been fully in school for over 1 year. Second, my son is a lacrosse player, and his motivation and self-confidence are directly related to his ability to play lacrosse. Both the boys and girls basketball teams have been negatively affected by the school's policy regarding a possible exposure. The girls' team was quarantined for 16 days post-exposure, and the boys' team was told to quarantine for 14 days after their exposure. Please consider changing your policy to align with the CDC and the State Health Department's recommendation, which is a 10-day quarantine or 7 days with a negative test and no symptoms. This decision will affect all athletes moving forward. Keep in mind that the ACIT program will include testing asymptomatic players on our teams and most Central League teams. Thank you for your time and consideration. I appreciate the board's time, and I know these are not easy decisions for you to make, but please know our children need in-person learning. Kim Graham, West Brookhaven Road in Wallingford, left February 22nd. I have a question for the board. That is, given the fact that the Chester County Department of Health just came out with relaxed guidelines today that could change how parents feel about their student attending in person, will there be allowances for families to change their decision that was on the survey last week? Thank you. This is from Emily Ekman, Westminster Drive in Wallingford. left February 22nd. Thank you to the school board members for all your help and support this past year. I wanted to reference that I give support to the teachers and I'm fully in support of them being vaccinated prior to everybody coming back full time. And until then, stay 6 feet from each other. I want to thank every single teacher in the Wallingford-Swarthmore School District for their courage, their great work, and their love for every single student in the school district. I hope and I pray that everyone stays safe during this pandemic. I oppose the idea of all the kids going back to 4.5 days a week and would love to see the cohort parents that truly would like to keep it to 2 days to do so. And I appreciate the fact that there is also an option for the online academy. Thank you so much and have a great day. This final comment is from Megan Eckenhoff, Beach Road in Wallingford, left February 22nd. I am an NPE mom. I'm calling regarding the issue of whether to reopen the school buildings full-time, and I urge you to follow the science. The CDC and the Chester County Health Department has been very clear in their recommendations, and I hope that none of us here would presume to know better. The teachers are not vaccinated. Too many families have vulnerable family members who are also unvaccinated. This is not the time to go rogue. No decision here will make everyone happy, but let's err on the side of caution. Start keeping the school doors locked and unfortunately it did not translate here. There's no reason to take unnecessary risk for students, teachers, and family safety. Please do the right thing. Keep the distancing at 6 feet and keep the focus on opening properly in the fall. Thank you.
That was the last one, correct? Are there any other in-person comments? Okay. Yeah, I'm getting a waving from Ferg, but there's no one in the hall. Okay. All right. I want to thank everyone who has contacted the board and has come to comment tonight and called in comments. We certainly have gotten, I think as many of you know, a great deal of input and comments, and we take it all quite seriously. With that, I do want to take us to items on the agenda for voting now. The first item for action is approval of the February 8th regular business meeting minutes, and I so move. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Matt. Any discussion on the minutes? Okay, Ms. Fagora, can you please take a roll call vote?
Mr. Ballas?
Aye.
Ms. Semino?
Aye.
Dr. Downey?
Aye.
Dr. Huff?
Aye.
Mr. Cudis?
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz?
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman?
Aye.
Dr. Grandy?
Aye.
Motion passes 9-0.
All right, thank you, Ms. Fagora. So that takes us to personnel. We have 8 items for action. Are there any on the list anyone would like to separate from the rest? Okay. We have approval of 1 retirement, Susan Vatnik, a special education teacher at SRS, with the approval of 3 appointments, Thomas Gates, family and consumer sciences teacher at the high school, Linda Hollahan, a chemistry teacher at the high school, and Jonathan Hardy, technology support specialist at the high school. We have the approval of 4 leaves of absence as listed in the agenda. We have the approval of the change in appointment of staff members as mentors during the 2020-2021 school year as stipulated. We have the approval of additions to the 2020-2021 activities supplemental appointment list as listed in the agenda. We have approval of additions to the 2020-2021 curriculum supplemental appointment list as stipulated. We have approval of compensation for staff for COVID compensatory services, tutoring services as stipulated. We have the approval of Kathleen Plows as independent contractor for live streaming services of up to 2 athletic contests as stipulated. We have approval of additions to the 2020-2021 conference requests as stipulated. All items in the section are as attached or described in the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Jerry.
Jerry
Do
Ballas.
we have a second?
Second again.
Thanks, Matt. Any discussion? Okay, Ms. Fagora, can you take a roll call vote?
Ms. Semino?
Aye.
Dr. Downey?
Aye.
Dr. Huff?
Aye.
Mr. Cudis?
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz?
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman?
Aye.
Mr. Ballas?
Aye.
Dr. Grandy?
Aye.
Personnel motion, it passes 9-0.
All right, thank you, Ms. Fagora. So that takes us to curriculum. There are 3 items. I'm going to start with the first 2, unless anyone would like those 2 separated. Okay. First is the approval of the 2020-2021 related services provider contracts as stipulated. And second is the approval of the 360-degree therapy agreement for contracted special education teachers. These items are as attached or described in the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thanks, Matt. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Larry. Any discussion? Okay, Ms. Fagora, can you take a roll call vote?
Dr. Downey,
Aye.
Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Mr. Ballas,
Aye.
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye.
Curriculum items A and B pass 9-0.
Okay. Next up, we have approval of revisions to the WSSD Health and Safety Plan for reopening schools as stipulated. This is the item that was discussed extensively during our focus topic this evening. The revised plan is as attached and also includes the revised guidance from the Chester County Health Department and further guidance from CHOP Policy Lab. Both are appended to the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Kelly. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Chapin. Okay, that takes us to discussion, and I'm going to take the prerogative here to start the discussion, if that's okay. Obviously, this has been a big issue for our entire district, for our entire community to talk through and work through. I myself have given a great deal of thought as to how we move forward, and I know every other board member has done the same thing. And I know there are diverse views on our board and in our community, but I think, again, has been said multiple times tonight that we all share the same goal, which is to provide the best education possible while balancing that with health and safety concerns. So we have that common goal, and the question is how and when to do it. Tonight, we saw survey data that gives us a pretty strong sense of the views of our elementary families. We did see that many of our families that have their children enrolled in our hybrid program want to see their children return to school full-time soon and support relaxing social distancing requirements to achieve that goal. At the same time, I completely recognize that some of our families are very worried about this change, and I understand that. And I certainly know some of our teachers are worried as well. We've heard from families through our district survey. We've heard from hundreds through comments, emails, and other communication. And I think I speak for most of the board members when I say it's not an easy decision, and it certainly weighs heavily on me. I've considered the new guidance from the CDC, the Chester County Health Department, the new guidance from CHOP. And as I shared at the last meeting, I do spend a lot of time reading study after study that relates to COVID risks in schools and take this decision very seriously. But I do believe we're at a time when we need to move forward. The COVID rates in our community have really improved dramatically over the past 1.5 months. They're not as low as we all want them to be, but they are coming down at a quite rapid rate. We also have to consider, I think, the costs to our kids that are accumulating over time, educationally, socially, and emotionally. We've talked about these issues a lot. And those costs are greater 12 months into the pandemic than they were a few months into the pandemic last spring or even in the early fall. We also have to consider the scientific evidence that shows that schools are much safer than many had imagined. We really had hardly any research to answer this question last summer when this board was wrestling with these decisions. But most studies that evaluate risks in schools that have just been published in the past 2 to 3 months really show that schools have been relatively safe. So how we weigh the issues of health and safety, education, social and emotional well-being of our students has to shift over time and adapt to our new knowledge. And what about the new CDC guidelines? I have deep respect for the CDC. I work in healthcare and public health, but those guidelines were written to apply to all districts, including those that have never been open, those with fewer resources, those with little experience with COVID mitigation, and far lower mask compliance. If we strictly followed these guidelines, we might even consider our high school not being open now. In one interview with the CDC director, one of the reasons that she stated why they were cautious was that just 60% of students are wearing masks appropriately in schools, and that is certainly not us. As we also talked about, we're also about to launch a new testing program, which is one reason I think that the Chester County Health Department has changed their recommendations. They feel much more confident about the safety of schools, knowing that that program is being deployed. And having our own data, as I mentioned earlier, can make our schools even safer. We'll track asymptomatic screening results of teachers and staff, students in higher risk settings. And as I mentioned earlier, perhaps most importantly, we'll be able to test students and staff that are in quarantine due to an exposure at school, which will give us critical information about any possible transmission that is occurring in school. It would give us a very early warning sign in our schools and allow us to react quickly. We've never had this type of data and information to inform our decisions, and now we will. Testing, in my view, has been a missing piece of the puzzle that makes it possible to relax one of our measures. Bucks County has been following this roadmap of testing students in quarantine. And through this testing, they've demonstrated that in-school transmission there has been very rare, even when relaxing distance requirements. I'm also very encouraged by the HVAC testing results that we heard from Mr. Abbott. Our system far exceeds recommended ventilation requirements for COVID mitigation that frankly, a lot of school districts are not able to achieve. So all in all, we are in very good shape in terms of all of our layered mitigation strategies. And I think that's why we have not seen transmission in our own classrooms. And again, I want to echo that I know our teachers are under enormous stress. Under normal circumstances, teaching is very hard work. And under the current circumstances, it's even harder. And our teachers have been resilient, committed, and caring. I know we're asking them to potentially adapt again and again, and perhaps one more time tonight. And I have such deep respect and admiration for our teachers. As I said earlier, I really look up to so many of the teachers in our district who've given my own children such a remarkable education here. And I know many, many families in this district feel the same way. We will continue to advocate for vaccine availability. We can continue to value safety as we move forward. But the question is, how do we move forward? So I would like to put forward a little bit of a compromise and an approach that I think speaks to those that want kids in full-time as quickly as possible and those that want to go a little bit slower. I think none of us can ask for perfect right now. So I'd like to offer a motion that I think can help us come together, our board, our district, and our community. I hope everyone can give a little. I would like to propose an amendment, a small amendment to the health and safety plan that's on the agenda. And let me just summarize it and then I'll state what it is. If rates fall below 100 per 100,000 per the CCHD guidelines on or around March 5th, we move forward with the elementary transition plan on March 18th. And all the signs point to us clearly heading in that direction, and I hope we get there. If we don't get there on March 5th or around March 5th, around the time we'll have access to that data, we still move forward, but do so on April 5th, right after spring break, the day after the spring break recess. And we fully commit to moving forward unless there's some dramatic change that we're confronted with. And of course, if there's some dramatic change we're confronted with, we can always look at the situation and make some decisions. So you might ask, why tie things to the threshold in March, but not in April? I think the difference is we have enough time to not just launch our testing program, which will launch in early March, but to ensure it's fully operational with some accumulated data for multiple weeks. So I do think with everything that we're doing as a district, the experience that we've had with kids in our buildings going all the way back to the very end of September, beginning of October, it is time to move forward. And with this amendment, it will be as soon as March 18th, but certainly no later than April 5th. So let me just read the specific language I would like to offer. The areas of the plan that allow for 3 feet of social distancing will take effect on March 18th if 7-day COVID-19 incidence rates in the county or district are less than 100 per 100,000. The district will review data on or around March 5th. If rates exceed these levels, the areas of the plan that allow for 3 feet of social distancing will take effect on April 5th, when the district will have its own operational COVID-19 testing program and data from multiple weeks of that program. So I'm hoping that all of you can support this. I hope it's a reasonable compromise, and I'm asking for a second.
A second.
Thanks, Matt. Discussion on the motion to amend.
So if I can, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that you said, Dr. Grande. One is, yeah, I share your respect and admiration and gratitude for our teachers, and I'm sure that my fellow board members do as well. My kids have received an incredible education at the schools at all different levels of this district, and the teachers are just an incredible resource, and they've been dynamic and caring, and they're everything we ask for in teachers, and I care about them deeply. And so a bunch of the comments that we've heard over time, and again tonight, have really pointed to vaccination, and we should wait for vaccination. And Dr. Grande, you talked about vaccine availability, or you mentioned it. And I just wanted to point out that, yeah, teachers should be in phase 1A. They're unfortunately not. They're in phase 1B. My wife teaches at Villanova, and she's in that same boat. And it's really frustrating to me, but that's the reality we're in. There's 246,000 people ahead of them in line in Delaware County, and we're currently vaccinating in Delaware County at 5,000 people a week. So we're talking about at that current pace, mid-December, and that's just not realistic. I hope it picks up and picks up quickly, but we can't wait. Thank you.
Other discussion? Jerry.
Just wanted to confirm a couple of elements of the health and safety plan that I thought I heard. Teachers will continue at a 6-foot social distance at all times.
That is correct.
And second, that students, if masks are off for any reason, would be also at 6 feet social distance. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Kelly?
I think I wanted to just share that I have had many sleepless nights wrestling with this decision. And those who know me know that that's very true. At the end of the day, we've had a lot of folks who read the CDC guidance to say that you cannot go less than 6 feet. We've had just as many read that guidance saying that it absolutely says we can go forward at 6 feet. And the same is true with the CCHD guidance that has come out more recently. And Dr. Grande, I think you spoke to the point that is addressed very specifically in the CHOP guidance that came out mid last week, which is that the more conservative guidelines that were contained in that CDC guidance, they specifically point to this and talk about how those thresholds, and I quote, CDC's thresholds should be viewed as more relative than absolute. And they specifically pointed then to the qualifying language of to the greatest extent possible. They encourage schools to use flex and outdoor space to the extent they can for those highest risk moments. Which we are looking at. We are looking at all of those opportunities for the highest risk moments to have the maximum distancing. And we have been assured repeatedly that those times where there will not be masks will be at 6 feet, particularly at lunch. And so while I struggled very much with this decision, I struggled with a decision that, while overwhelmingly supported by our parents in a cohort model, still makes some very uncomfortable. And that really gave me pause. At the end of the day, when I read the guidance from Children's Hospital that we've relied on multiple times throughout this entire time, speaking to us saying that you need to look at this as a relative guidance, you need to look at your multi-layered strategies, and pointing to the value of the testing program that we're going to have in place. I feel that based on the feedback from our parents, what we can absolutely see and agree is improvements that we see when children are in person. I fully support your motion, and I feel it's the right thing to do in our district to move forward.
Thanks, Kelly, and I share that experience with sleepless nights. Marilyn.
Sleeping is overrated, apparently.
I don't know about that.
I think I have a parliamentary question because my comment is not directly related to your amendment. So would it be more appropriate for it to come after we vote on the amendment?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a fair amount of latitude on what we discussed related to the amendment, but yes, that in general, if it's not related to the amendment, it can hold till afterwards. I see Mr. Berman appeared on my screen, so maybe he wants to weigh in on the parliamentary question.
I was going to say the same thing.
Okay,
Then I will wait.
okay. Other comments on the amendment? Stephen?
Yes, I think it's wise to tie our movement to our local data. I do think there are a lot of things about our district that make us special and different, and I think everybody agrees on that. I think everybody, no matter which way they wish this decision comes out, agrees that our district is unique and different and special in a lot of ways. So I also have wrestled with this, and I get increasingly comfortable stepping away from the perceived certainty of the CDC, just stay at 6, that's a certain and it's sweet. Certainty makes us feel better, but knowing that that is a backdrop for a lot of communities that cannot perform the way that we can perform and that we all know that we have and will continue to. And on that measure, I would say that the decision to tie our timing to the local data isn't a signal that we're endorsing relaxing any of these metrics outside of school, but rather we actually have to step them up in order that we can do this for our kids. So it's to take very seriously and not misunderstand if this board does decide that we're willing to relax this one metric on the basis of everything that we've heard tonight, in confidence, full confidence that it's safe and the testing will tell us, that doesn't mean outside of school, everybody, all of a sudden we can go 3 feet. In fact, it's the opposite.
Thank you for that. Totally agree. Any other comments on the amendment? All right, Ms. Fagora, can you please take a roll call vote?
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz, Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Mr. Ballas,
Jerry, you're muted.
Mr. Ballas,
Aye.
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Downey,
Aye.
Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye.
The motion to amend passes 9-0.
Thank you, everyone. So that takes us to now the health and safety plan that's on the agenda as amended by the motion that just passed. And Marilyn, I think I'll start with you.
Okay, so my question actually came based on some of the comments we heard tonight from the basketball families. And so my question was really when this health and safety plan will take effect, because at least when I read the version that was out on Saturday, it sounded like the new health and safety plan as a whole wasn't taking an effect until March 18th. And so I'm wondering if we want that piece about the quarantining to take effect earlier, do we need to amend it to make that happen?
So the health and safety plan right now, all the provisions go into effect immediately, with the exception of the social distancing modifications that enable the elementary transition plan. And I believe it's on the, okay, there was a tweaked version attached to the agenda that I believe the cover is modified and maybe, are there other places?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
There's one other place, but yes, that it would go into effect immediately. And it's also on page.
So So I guess I read the copy that came out on Saturday. Were there any other changes to that other than the effective date on the title page and the other piece that was already mentioned tonight?
Dr. Huff, minor changes that went through the review with Jean Kasner. She aligned a couple of things for consistency, but nothing substantive.
Okay, thank you.
Other discussion? Okay, Ms. Fagora, can you please take a roll call?
Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Mr. Ballas,
Aye.
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Downey,
I think she might be frozen.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes 9-0.
All right, that takes us to finance. Again, I just want to thank everyone. I think it's not just Kelly that has lost sleep over the last couple of weeks. I think many people have, and I know how seriously everyone takes this issue. So it takes us to finance. We have 4 items for approval. Are there any items on the list anyone on the board would like to separate from the rest? Okay. We have approval of payment of invoices to vendors dated January 20th, 2021 through February 16th, 2021. We have acknowledgement of receipt of the financial statements as stipulated. We have approval of the treasurer's report for January 2021. And we have approval of 2020-2021 budget transfers as stipulated. All items in this section are as attached or described in the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Larry. Second?
Second.
Is that you, Jacob? Or that was you, Kelly? Kelly, okay. Any discussion?
I'm sorry, the second was Ms. Walkman.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Fagora, can you please take a roll call vote?
Mrs. Lentz.
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Mr. Ballas,
Aye.
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Downey,
Aye.
Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Mr. Cutis,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye.
Motion passes 9-0.
Thank you, Ms. Fagora. That takes us to the section on the agenda called Other, which is the approval of Mr. Cutis as the DCIU, not that we would call you the other, as the DCIU board representative for a term commencing July 1st, 2021 and ending June 30th, 2024. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I'm going to take Michelle on that one. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, that's Chapin. Any discussion?
Thank you.
One question.
Yes.
Doesn't June 30th, 2024 extend past Larry's term on the board?
It does, but that's like a standard.
Can you turn your microphone on? Sorry.
It does, but that's a standard term for assignment to the DCIU board. So
Okay.
everybody's assigned for that 4-year period.
And I hope you're still on the board, June 30th, 2024. Wanted to make sure.
All right, everyone's getting a little punchy. So any other discussion? Okay, Ms. Fagora, can you please take a roll call vote?
Mr. Sullivan,
Aye.
Mrs. Walkman,
Aye.
Mr. Ballas,
Aye.
Ms. Semino,
Aye.
Dr. Downey,
Aye.
Dr. Huff,
Aye.
Mr. Cutis,
Do I abstain?
No.
Aye.
Mrs. Lentz,
Aye.
Dr. Grandy.
Aye.
Motion passes 9-0.
All right, thank you, Ms. Fedora. Now, I should have said you could abstain, but there's no reason to abstain. So I hope I didn't twist your arm into voting. Okay, so that takes us to audience recognition, time for responses for topics not on the agenda. As I mentioned earlier, we're limiting this to a total time of 30 minutes. It's the same procedures as earlier. We don't have any phoned in comments for things not on the agenda. And I don't believe we have anybody for in person. No one's here. Okay. So that takes us to school board reports. Does anyone have a report from a district subcommittee or out of district role?
I can provide a brief update from our most recent DEI Action Committee.
Great.
We met recently, I can't remember exactly which date, but we heard just a tremendous feedback particularly from our teachers in the elementary and the middle school about the wonderful things that are happening in celebration, both of Black History Month and our Black Lives Matter Day of Affirmation. And it was just very, very exciting to hear the energy and the wonderful things that are taking place. At the same time, I do want to acknowledge that there's more support needed and more of a framework that we need to embed in the high school. And so that's an area of focus moving forward for all of us on the action committee and on the board subcommittee. The other thing I wanted to comment on is I wanted to also thank the WSEA for their what do we call that? The resolution in support of the Black Lives Matter at School, our resolution. If there are any of my fellow members of the committee, anything you would like to add to that?
No, that's a good summary, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other reports? Okay, do we have any old business? Any new business? All right, thank you. This meeting's adjourned.